Hi, Dave. Welcome back to the Mate Night
Hey,
Podcast.
Dave.
Oh, let's go. We're ranking every film ever made. This is episode 4, Dune Part 2. We want our rankings to be as accurate as possible. So how do we do that? We do it by rating them out of 10 in 9 different categories and then take the average. The first 2 categories are how much Fred enjoyed it and how much Jamie enjoyed it. And we will give these rankings without having spoken a word to each other.
Nada.
This makes sure that they're completely untainted from the other person's opinion, but then we will go on to discuss and rate them based on the quality of the plot, character, dialogue, performance, visual, sound, genre realization. That's the final one. We haven't yet spoken a word to each other about Dune Part 2. There will be spoilers. Please,
Big time.
if you have not watched this yet, do not listen to this.
We're really
episode.
bad. We're really... I felt so
We're really bad. We're really
I
bad.
fucked it. My first word. we're really bad at... we're still finding our feet here. And to be honest, the spoiler stuff is not something we've got that good at signposting yet. So we're going to try and limit all spoilers up to like the first 5 minutes. But beyond that, really, you're going into murky waters here.
Just don't even take the risk. Don't
try.
take the risk. Okay, so before we go on to the famous Mate Night enjoyment ranking,
Gut reaction.
Fred, why don't you tell us what film we're watching and why we're watching it?
I'd love to. So, why would someone watch Dune 2? Firstly, the film adapts one of the great works of 20th century fiction. That's Frank Herbert's eponymous Dune, which is a prescient sci-fi fantasy, and it's lauded for tackling some really rich themes of power, politics, religion particularly, as well as humanity and, presciently, as mentioned, artificial intelligence. And for a long time, it was considered impossible to adapt well into film, and that's because of a few reasons, but particularly the intricate and sprawling network of characters, each one with their own interests and motives. Aside from that, you've got the world building, which is very exposition heavy in the book. Hard to translate to film that. But most notably, it's the heavy reliance on internal dialogue, which, I mean, historically hasn't been easy to film well. When people are talking in their heads, how are you supposed to represent that in film? So this comes out in 1965, and then 2 years after it's first published, in the small village of Gentilly in Bécancour, Quebec, is born Denis Villeneuve, who reads Dune as an adolescent and becomes entranced with the world that Herbert has created. And then when Denis grows up, he becomes a director and goes on to put together a very well-revered catalogue of films, which includes, but is not limited to, Prisoners, Sicario, Enemy. So some of these that we've watched, I know we watched Prisoners together a while back, very good films, and also a couple that fall within the sci-fi genre specifically. And really he's become the modern sci-fi filmmaker, because not many make the move over to sci-fi, and he's doing it effectively. And so all the while he's doing this, he dreams, and it's his passion project, to tell his version of the story he fell in love with as a boy, which he finally gets a chance to do, where it's announced in 2017, 2018, that he's going to have a crack at Dune. So whilst there is a cult following of David Lynch's 1984 version, most would say, including David Lynch himself, that there hadn't been a definitive, well-made film version of Dune until 2021, when Villeneuve's Part 1 is released to widespread critical acclaim. So why then would you be watching Dune Part 2? Because going into it, you've got a director who's at the top of his game, and in Part 1 he showed it was possible to adapt the unadaptable Dune successfully. So now he's tackling the second half of the book, and this is where the story reaches its climax. We've got new characters that are introduced, the universe is expanded, the themes that we spoke about before, like religion and isolation, are more closely examined, and generally the stakes are raised in the second half of the book. So why would you watch Dune 2? To see if he can pull it off.
That is a bloody good reason to watch it. I
Thanks,
like that
mate.
a lot. I didn't think of that. Yeah, that's good. I
was
that.
thinking about it specifically, like what the approach was, because we've got here like Dune Part 1. We're going to assume that if you found this, you've at least watched Dune Part 1. Because
I mean, props to you if you haven't watched Dune Part 1.
You don't need to go into this much prep to watch the second one. But yeah, really the excitement, I think, for a lot of people, and the reason why people are watching it is because it's almost an untackleable, or considered to be an untackleable book to film. And when someone who has a passion for it goes about it and succeeds, as most people would argue he has within the first one, there's the interest of the second one, where in the book you've basically got all of the heavy lifting out of the way. So now it's time for the action-based second half. How's he going to do? How's he going to go about it? And that's what the interest was.
He absolutely killed it in the first one as well, didn't he?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And we'll go into it in more detail, but personally, I loved the first one and was very, very excited to watch Dune Part 2. And there was actually a writer's strike which prevented it from happening, pushed it out. And so there was a lot of anticipation personally for me when it came to it. Yeah. And really, I don't know if there's any greater segue into what we scored it.
Yeah, so we've watched Dune Part 2. Fred, you've watched it?
Twice
now, which is a little indication for me, but that's it. That's the most I've ever known about how you felt about a film prior to us discussing it, is that I know that you've seen it twice.
For sure.
So you must like it a little bit, but
yeah.
Oh, I'm excited. So we always count each other in, right? One of us will count in, and then one of us will say our answer, and then the other one will give ours. So who went first last time?
What was our last film? Jaws.
Yeah.
It was me.
You went first last time.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so you're going to count me in. 3, 2, 1. Then I'm going to say it. Then you're going to say it.
Yeah. Wait.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Numbers, yeah?
Hey.
Mine's in between. I've got it. I know what I'm going to give, but I'm in an hour and 1 point. But
I have. Oh, sorry. Are you ready? Are you ready to find out?
I'm ready to find out. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, you're going to count as 3, 2, 1. Then we're going to give us our scores. Dune 2. A cinematic exploration of galactic politics out of 10.
3, 2, 1.
8.2.
9.2.
What? I thought you might be in the 9s.
Yeah, I'm surprised it was a bit. I would have thought you'd be pushing it a bit higher. So first things first, I want to know. I'm more interested in your score because, as Jamie mentioned, he had an inclination that I liked the film based on the fact that before we decided to record, I'd already watched it twice. And I did say I liked it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have known what I'd have scored. So 8.2 is for people not in the know. That's a good score.
It's very good. It's very, very good. So part of the thing for me was I came out of the cinema and I was like, that could be a 9.
Yeah.
And then I prepared a review for this, and that really helped me kind of think about how I felt about the movie. And there were. As we said earlier, we're going to rate it based on like plot, character, things like that. And the thing that I felt was this was an unbelievably good movie, right? It was a very, very, very good movie. Everything was done to perfection. You mentioned about how Villeneuve loved this was what he was almost born to do. You can really tell.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of things that held it back for me, and one of them was Paul's plot armor. I just felt like they couldn't kill him throughout the whole, so there's the sandworm riding, right? Unbelievable sequence. But I wasn't that nervous about it. So there was kind of like a few moments where Paul's plot armor were a problem for me.
Okay.
Then there was Austin Butler's character, who personally I thought could have been done better because in his introduction where he's supposed to be a badass, he slices another servant's throat, which, I mean, come on, they do that on the daily at the heart. So there's that, okay, that's not that scary or impressive.
He's evil.
And then he goes out into the gladiator pit and he's upset because one of the people isn't drugged up. And I'm like, okay, so he's not. They've done an amazing job of making him this magnificent appearing thing, but actually the actions, the decisions, the important bits didn't really make him feel to me like much of a threat. And so I was like, okay, so there's that. And then there were just kind of a few little things like this. One of the things that I think really, if I was Denis, I would have done is put more makeup on and disguise Timothy and Zendaya a bit more. Because personally, and this is just me, I couldn't forget that it was Timothy and Zendaya. I was just watching them do their parts and kind of really enjoying the moment of where everyone's kind of blowing smoke up their ass a bit. And I was just like, I would have preferred it if they'd have made his hair different and just kind of made things. So they were kind of. I was writing the review, and I was like, "This was a ridiculously good movie." But there are a few problems, and this is the thing that I decided to mention in the review. The main thing that I had was everything was epic and grand and massive and brilliant, and the budget was hundreds of millions, and everything. It was an ensemble, and you know it was so big that for me they forgot about the human element of the pain of losing a father in the first thing. And so like I didn't feel like I desperately wanted revenge on the Harkonnens. I actually didn't really care that much whether they got revenge on the Harkonnens because the attitude of everyone in the film was, oh, House Atreides has been liquidated. Not, oh, you killed my dad, my husband, this person who I'm feeling this unbelievable amount of pain that I've lost. It's like, oh, you assholes have betrayed us and House Atreides, and I'm so annoyed about that. And I was like, you vicariously.
You thought it was more the honor side of it rather than the human element.
Rather than I wanted the pain to feel more real. There was never any moments where I was like, I can't believe that they've killed this person. I feel genuinely upset about this. And so like the whole driving force, which is sort of pushing Paul forward, which is about revenge, really, to me didn't feel like that important. Like I just didn't really. I was like, yeah, it'd be cool if he got revenge on these guys. They betrayed him. They're clearly bad guys. Like that was a bit spoon-fed. So it's kind of, I was going through it and I did that thing where I just kind of thought of everything that I didn't like about it. And I was like, okay, it's going to score ridiculously high in the objective scorings for me.
Right. Okay.
But the enjoyment was lost on a few things where I couldn't escape from the stardom of the main cast, and I didn't buy the emotion behind the drive of the story.
In terms of enjoyment, though, gut reaction.
Yeah.
Do you still stand by, okay, that's what made my enjoyment less, like an 8.2 rather than a higher score with those particular plot points?
The thing that made it less enjoyable was that I didn't feel the emotional connection with the story.
Okay.
It felt like the best bits of Game of Thrones politics, but not with any of the. It's like I say, it really comes down to pain. It's like I didn't feel any real pain about any of the loss, and like there was during the first movie. It was kind of sad when Jason Momoa's character dies. I forget his name.
Yeah.
But you don't want him to die.
It's the other one. Can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name. It's a bit silly, but whatever the case, there's kind of a bit of sadness. But for me, like I think I would have enjoyed the film more if I felt truly connected to the pain and the story and the drive and the thing. I didn't really care if Paul took on this power that was being given to him. I didn't really care that much if he got his revenge. I didn't really care if he got with Zendaya. Like there wasn't enough in it that made me really care about what happened. I just kind of left it and was like, yeah, that was fucking awesome. But like, Paul could have died. It wouldn't have really made much sense. But Paul could have died. I wouldn't really cared. And the whole universe would have just carried on without him. Everyone would have just forgotten about Atreides and no one would have cared. And
but I think that's what I really like about it. And while I get your point, if you're going into it thinking this is a revenge plot, the driving motives of Herbert are to delve into the theme of revenge, and if that's what you're looking for, I agree. It doesn't hit on that point as hard. Like it's clear that Paul's character is after revenge for what has happened to his house, to his family, to his father. But really, the main or the larger element of the story is the problems that Herbert had around religious fervor. Messiah complexes,
sure,
and balance. And what I really like is balancing that with the fact that actually the stories that were told by the Bene Gesserit, the Kwisatz Haderach, the artificially manufactured superhuman, Paul is very aware that this is a concept that is man-made, and he can see what it's doing, and yet throughout the film several times, you can't deny that it is actually happening. Which
it's awesome.
I think that the film itself goes along that line more than the revenge plot. So if you enjoy it for that, I think that the revenge element, I'm more than happy with that taking a backseat. It's not one of my issues, the plot.
Yeah. I don't think that the revenge is necessarily the most important or the only source of enjoyment. But for me to really enjoy a film, I need some sort of emotional connection to the story and to the drive. And I didn't feel any like it was very interesting, right? You're basically giving him the two movies are just like, here's some nukes. Here's a Messiah like situation you've got. Like, here's the power of your Atreides family. Here, and they just keep piling more and more and more and more power onto him, and it's really cool to see how he handles that. And there's a lot that's right, but for me, like, it needs to come with an emotional connection. That's what makes a story a good story for me. An enjoyable story is like the emotional connection, and I feel like it was just incredibly interesting, but like it wasn't that like powerful for me.
Yeah, I think that for me, the themes that he's exploring are much more interesting than the revenge plot. So the religious element, the historical, the kind of eugenics of creating this character over a long period of time, over generations, having this master plan, and the political element, I find those much more interesting than the standard revenge plot. And so I'm much more willing to allow those to be waylaid a bit. In terms of the overall effect that has on the film, I just really felt like, okay, we're going to focus on this Messiah element. The things that happen to him, which are plot armor, quote unquote, right? So the fact that he gets the nukes, if Gurney's alive and he knows where the nukes are, and, you know, little things like, why wouldn't, that's such a stupid place to put them. It's because no one would think to look there. Yeah, they would.
Of course they would. Well, not the Harkonnens. I mean, it took them 2 leaders to come up with blowing up the base.
Mate, when I watched it, there are plot points which I don't like, but there are plot points that I don't like, and there are performances I don't like.
Okay.
Those are my gripes.
Okay.
And I still am unsure whether I prefer the first film or the second film. Okay. But as a whole, if I were to take them as 2 in 1, right?
Yeah.
I just was so absorbed. The minute I was invited to experience this world, just head over heels. I love fantasy sci-fi stuff, which, like, in the researching into this more. Did you end up watching the Alt-Shift-X video on that?
I didn't.
Oh man, like. I love it when someone conveniently explains a book without me having to read it. So that was really useful.
Shout out to Alt-Shift-X
for being
you are
one
phenomenal. Of the best creators ever.
Yeah. You ruined the last seasons of Game of Thrones for me by being much better than the story it was.
His stuff was so good.
You're incredible, mate. So I watched his Dune, and he's got like an hour-and-a-half episode on Dune after the first one came out. And he does an excellent job of not spoiling the second one. He just goes into all the bits that Denis left out. Okay. Which, again, I think Denis does an incredible job. Based on what I understand of the book, which I haven't read, he does an unbelievable job in capturing the essence of what Frank Herbert was trying to put onto the page from a message standpoint. All of the philosophical and
the big questions,
human themes,
religion, colonialism, things like that.
He did a great job of doing that without having tons of exposition, loads of dialogue. He didn't spoon feed you, but he gave you enough where if you're invested into it, which I was, you'd want to find out more and understand why he made those decisions. So as a whole, I was just so invested that I don't mind some of the bits that I didn't like.
I would agree.
It's a case of, yes, if the cast was better in the second one, I thought the cast in particular, there were a few.
Okay, well, that was actually something that I was really looking forward to asking you, because I find it quite difficult to judge accents and acting. Both of them I'm not very sure about whether someone's doing a good or a bad job on. And I was curious to see what you thought about the acting and the accents in Dune Part 2.
Which ones specifically?
Just any of them that stood out to you as good or bad.
Yeah, okay. So, in my opinion, I would rather that they... I definitely prefer fantasy and historical dramas when they have British accents. It's something about the ones that I've watched, but I can get on board with them being American. So like the Atreides, if you're like these are American accented characters, yeah, that's fine. I can get on board with.
Were they consistent in the Atreides?
I mean, they were American outside of. So Lady Jessica has an English accent.
She's
I think she's Swedish in real life, but she pretty much sounds.
She's not really Atreides anyway, is she?
But she's Bene Gesserit, yeah. And some of the other Bene Gesserit, like the Reverend Mother, English accent.
Okay.
The other one who was on the Harkonnen planet, the one.
Oh, Leia Seydoux.
Is that her name?
The actress's name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know where she's from? She's obviously not.
She's European.
Yeah,
like
she's not English, but
yeah.
I could get on board with that. Different people across the
The
world.
Bene Gesserit are more like a religion that bring people from elsewhere, I'd imagine. So yeah.
I think that. So Florence Pugh is obviously English, doing an American accent. No problem with her American accent, but I did feel like they missed a trick with having the Emperor's family not being English accented.
Yeah.
I thought that would have suited them better, particularly because the performance I liked least was Christopher Walken's.
I that was one that stood out to me as
An odd choice.
I agree completely.
I didn't,
and I don't know
so
acting very well.
I'm glad he, in all honesty, although he was an important character, most of the plot didn't go through him, which is good.
I agree.
Where I disagree, I think my favourite performance is probably Austin Butler.
Yeah, okay.
I think he's great, and so there the accents again are a bit interesting because basically you've got the Baron who is played by Skarsgård. I can't remember the first name.
Steven.
Stellan, maybe. There's a few Skarsgårds. So he plays the Baron, and he does his standard.
He just does his voice. Good man.
Fair enough. But then you've got the Beast Raban, played by Batista.
Yep.
He does his voice. So you're thinking, okay, I guess it doesn't matter that much. Maybe they come from different areas, even though he's his nephew. But then you have Fade Rosha.
We'll call him that, like that, but I think it might be Fade Ralph.
Fade Ralph. Yeah.
It's something like Fade Ralph.
Fred Ralph. We've got
something scary like Ralph.
We've got Fred Ralph. He decides to just basically completely mimic Skarsgård's accent. And I think he does an incredible job. I genuinely thought, because he's obviously got a lot of makeup on, I forgot who played him when I watched it. Right. You know how the Skarsgårds, there's like a few of them. So Stellan's the patriarch, or I think there's a couple of others either in the same family,
right?
Or they're called Skarsgård.
Like actors.
There are a few Skarsgårds. I don't know if they're all in the same family, but they're all from like Sweden.
Okay.
And one of them is called Alexander Skarsgård.
Okay.
I think one of the Skarsgårds anyway played Pennywise in It.
Oh, okay.
And I was pretty sure it was him.
Playing
Austin Butler's
Ralph.
character.
Yeah.
And then when I found out it was Austin Butler, I'd forgotten who played it. I was like, oh shit, yeah.
Right.
I was very surprised.
Yeah, okay.
So I thought he did a very good job. And he also sounded like Stellan Skarsgård.
I would agree. I for the record, my problem with that character wasn't the acting. It was more the decisions of how to introduce him, and it just didn't seem like the power scaling of him was just wrong. Basically, they didn't do a good job of introducing him.
For me, all right, from a plot perspective, right, what I really enjoyed was how religion is used and Herbert's vision of creating messiahs, but also conflicting it with there actually being some supernatural elements as well. Yeah. So that was my enjoyment. And the plot, like the great driving force of it.
The great driving force.
Some of the things that were thrown in to make it happen, where we need to get from point A.
Yeah.
Paul Atreides is stranded in desert Arrakis to he's going to basically become the emperor or about to take over the empire. I wasn't actually that fussed. I was more overwhelmed with the enjoyment of the different worlds, the different characters that were being
so immersive,
all with different political motives. I was really, really invested.
If it's sorry, I was curious to just get your take on a couple more performances.
Yeah, sure.
Timothy Chalamet.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about him, to be honest, but I don't.
In this,
I don't think it's him doing a bad job. I just felt like I could have seen better performers taking it on. I think, all right, he does a good job, but considering he is basically carrying what is now, for me, like a fantasy/sci-fi franchise that I really am invested in.
Yeah.
If in an ideal world, there would be maybe another actor that I think would.
Do you have is there anybody that could come to mind at all that might play? Paul. Who would play Paul?
Because it has to be kind of young. It depends if you'd want an American as well. Like
no, just anybody who might. And you're allowed, if you come up with somebody who's not of the age now, but who might have fit the role when they were younger, I'd be interested if there's anyone that comes to mind.
So you want someone kind of diminutive.
Because he had the right kind of stature for the role, right? He
yeah,
kind of was, like you wanted him to not be too imposing.
And funnily enough, I thought he was. I liked him in the first one a bit more.
Okay.
Like the box scene.
Yeah.
I've watched that quite a few times, and I think he does a really good job in that.
He does do a good job of that.
It's almost, maybe it's just the American accent. And this is not just a problem of him or Dune, but typically in fantasy, like the dialogue's not always that good.
Yeah.
Like
Denis
the
comments on
writing
that.
is,
He even says like, I kind of just had to stick a bit to what Frank Herbert did, where he's just very limited on dialogue.
You're not talking like witty, sharp,
you
know, political commentary or anything.
But again,
like
that's kind of less of his performance. So it required a big range, didn't it? You know, because there were moments where he had to. The moment where I thought I really bought into it was when he had the paternal relationships with Stilgard and with Leto in his first, and you could kind of see. I guess it just felt more natural with his stature, which I understand is part of the story, is about this boy being thrust into this. But when you see his relationship and the dynamic between him and Stilgar, him and Leto, things like that, that felt to me much more convincing than when he was trying to be like intimidating in the second film. And that generally just didn't quite hit for me.
In my opinion, though, those parts of the relationship are carried more
by the other. How good looking is Oscar? Is it Oscar Isaac?
Oscar Isaac.
Oh my God,
he's unbelievable.
I didn't really like
Javier Bardem.
Yeah, I mean he's unbelievably handsome, but in like there's something about Oscar Isaac that's just very traditionally like.
Yeah.
If you carved the perfect face, that would just be it.
And what's his face as well? Who plays Gurney? Thanos.
Oh, the guy who plays
Josh
Thanos.
Brolin.
Yeah.
He's a looker as well.
I mean, personally, I would like Oscar's like Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah, I mean, some real heavy hitters, and then you've got
makes you feel sick. You look in the mirror and you're like, oh my goodness.
And you've got what's his face in the first one, who dies? You mentioned him earlier.
Jason Momoa. Yeah.
Jesus,
I was thinking earlier, is his beard really shit?
He just takes off his beard in the first film.
Does he? I'm just thinking about it earlier on the drive around. And I was like, is Jason Momoa's beard really shit, or is it just my memory of it?
I think that his beard makes his face look good. And then in the first one, he removes it.
Does it?
And it's a bit jarring. But then you're like, no, he is handsome.
Yeah.
He is handsome.
Did you notice that in the first film, he kept he had like maybe 6
Boy.
lines, and he kept calling him my boy.
Oh, he's bad.
Every single line.
He's bad.
He was like, my boy.
Doesn't work. That's what I mean about.
Work,
I think it's maybe
the ensemble
Americans. They've got tough lines to do. Let's be honest. It's not easy. It doesn't just roll off the tongue. The lines.
Do you think that Jason Momoa chose to say "my boy" every single time he spoke, or was that a line that was given to him?
I don't know. I haven't. I wouldn't have thought he'd added it in, because I can't see them sticking with it. I think if Jason Momoa turned up and said, "I'm just going to start calling him my boy," someone would have gone, "Yeah, stop that."
Yeah.
It doesn't really work.
Shut up,
so
Jason.
I think it has to be in there. He must call him boy in the book.
Right.
And for me, look, fantasy is hard. Fantasy's hard to deliver. Some people who do it really well typically go all in, and it's still quite engaging. So one that gets brought up a lot, I can't remember his name, but the guy who plays the Emperor in Star Wars.
I'm not going to be able to tell you.
Yeah, not Count Dooku, but the guy who plays
terrible bunch of films.
Darth Sidious.
Darth Sidious. Is that really his name?
Maybe.
It sounds like the sort of thing that Star Wars would do.
In the film, so in the prequel films, there's a lot of performances which people are lukewarm towards,
yeah.
but his is pretty universally considered good. He pulls off. This is one thing where, for me, I don't think Dune will ever overtake Lord of the Rings in terms of fantasy things that I enjoy. And part of it is because, Lord of the Rings doesn't have the best dialogue. Like some of Legolas's lines are a bit like, come on. But
bit cheap.
Performance-wise, pretty much across the board, there aren't many bad performances.
Okay.
Like
in Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings is a really...
Is that the one...
That's
Lord of the Rings is the series with Samwise in it.
Yeah, I mean, his accent's a bit shocking.
Yeah, okay. That's not like the best performances ever.
But performance-wise, he's very good. It's just the accent's a bit bad. But
so is there any major people that we've missed? Obviously, I'll tell you a performance which stood out to me as good was Javier Bardem's. He was great. He was hilarious.
Good performance, but also it's a good character to play.
It is, yeah.
As an actor, I imagine he looked and was like, yeah, this is going to be a bit fun. I have heard, so having watched this, done a bit of research into it, people are big fans of both Timothy and Zendaya. Mm-hmm. I didn't care for either of them particularly.
No,
I wasn't that bought into the love story.
No.
And then her turn, interestingly, you might have found this out as well, was more of a choice of Denis.
Her
turn towards...
When she goes off in a massive tantrum at the end.
Going into a tantrum, but also throughout the film... Basically, her role, as I understand it, is expanded upon in the film compared to the book. They gave her a bit more of a starring role. And a lot of people really like that. And I probably do as well. I just didn't really buy their romance at any point. Part of the points which I found their acting the weakest for me were the scenes where they were supposed to be
intimate. Kiss scene, what did you think of
that? Just something that happened in the story that I didn't care about.
It wasn't that powerful, was it? It wasn't.
No, obviously
it wasn't like, oh my god, it's finally happening.
At least we knew it was. One of the real benefits of Dune is because he has the visions all before. Yeah. We know he's at least going to get with her at some point.
Yeah. It's a nice guarantee. And you feel a bit more confident
going into the film. You're like, well, at some point he's going to get with her. I'm prepared for probably an awkward scene where I have to see them kiss, and it was.
Does it make you uncomfortable when people kiss on camera?
Just men and women. But yeah, I was watching it and I was like, it's fine.
It wasn't that good.
The desert, obviously, her being the desert rose, which springs the water, that was in that scene as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, it is funny just like how Paul is refusing to believe that, he's a messiah or anything like that. When just things keep happening. Like,
probably,
mate.
Yeah. So, okay, so is Paul... I thought this was kind of one of the intentional questions of the film, though. Is like, as far as I could tell, it still was pretty clear that he isn't actually a religious, some sort of paranormal. His powers were within the rules set in the Duneverse.
Yeah, nice.
I got to use it. Right. I kind of always got the impression that Paul still is just effectively a plant by the Bene Gesserit. There is no actual unusual level of power in that universe. That's just accumulation of different powers.
So the Reverend Mothers, the Bene Gesserit, are able to... I believe this is only the Reverend Mothers. So if you recall, there's quite a few Bene Gesserit, and then it seems like each planet has their own Reverend Mother, which is part of the plot of this film, is Lady Jessica becoming the Reverend Mother for Arrakis. Within the Bene Gesserit, the Reverend Mothers are able to see the memories of their forebears.
Remember that? Yep.
So if you become the Reverend Mother, you are able to see what happened with the Reverend Mothers of the past. The Kwisatz Haderach, so it is a manufactured scheme that's generations, centuries old by the Bene Gesserit.
Very cool of them.
Yeah, very cool. And also really cool the way that Herbert created it in a way that you could see his thought process was really intricate in terms of, I think that the stuff around how they'd go to planets early and basically plant the seeds
cool,
of... his, religious monuments and things like that, and religious ideas, they would actually plant them and then allow them to spread. He compared it to kind of missionary work that he'd seen when he was, I don't know if he worked as a missionary or things like that, but he looked into stuff like this.
He did a lot of traveling,
to do with the
I
Jesuits, I think.
Right.
And so he compared it to that and saying this is, basically we're using religion to empower ourselves within new places. So the use of that was really cool. But the idea with the Kwisatz Haderach is that it's going to, we've planned all these bloodlines, and when this child is born, they are going to be able to not only see, all the previous Reverend Mother's memories, they can see all of their memories and all possible futures
right.
as well.
So he gets the accumulation of all of the Reverend Mothers, is that right?
Yeah, that's where I'm not too sure how many memories he gets to see, but he essentially he has the ability
knowledge, basically.
To basically see into the future
and
see all possible futures.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of one of the reasons why it bothered me. Because Zendaya's character, Chani or something, I think she's called.
Chani, Chani.
She's aware of the fact that he can see the future, right? And that he's choosing a path. And so he is choosing this path either knowing that the Fremen are going to die or that the Fremen are going to be fine. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets complex. The whole idea, Frank Herbert wrote Dune, right? And his idea was of the dangers of religion. Yeah. And I think the dangers of like omniscience and omnipresence, like how do you have, how can you know that an all-knowing, all-powerful creature can share our morals? Like the greater good for them is a much different concept than what the greater good for us might be. So I think the idea behind the original book was for him to create this messianic character and showcase what having a figure like this has made people do. Yeah. And it got very badly misinterpreted. Yeah. And that's actually part of the reason why Denis decided to make Chani's character much more of a devil's advocate sort of. Right. Clearly showing
to help communicate.
Yeah,
what
this
Herbert's
is bad. Things are going badly.
Were.
I don't think that's as clear in the book, from my understanding.
I didn't think it was that clear to me in the film. I didn't feel like he was doing anything that bad, really, until maybe when he then kind of pointlessly wages war on all the other houses for like literally no reason at the end.
So his goals are
to become the emperor.
So he knows, okay, this is what happens if I do nothing. We get crushed. That when he says, "I can see,"
being the Fremen,
I think the Fremen included in that. So when he finally drinks the sand piss and Chani cries on him, and then he resurrects, and now he's the Kwisatz Haderach. Yeah. Cool. That bit.
Yeah,
remember that.
A lot of bodily fluids passing around for this ritual. Going on to drink wine like the Catholics,
as is written.
You must drink piss. Really?
So he does all that. And I think that he is then able to see all pasts, all futures. I know, where I am in this world. I'm actually a Harkonnen. I'm part Harkonnen. I'm part Atreides. And also the only way to protect, or I think it's actually not even a case of to just protect the Fremen. The only way to save the universe, this is what he sees, is this path.
Right.
And that path does not care as much for the interests of maybe just the Fremen or just the Atreides.
It's just greater good.
It's like, okay, the world is, the universe is moving towards having all these disparate houses with atomic weapons that, similarly to our world, could at any point decide to take us out. So I think that when he finally awakens, my understanding is the idea is that he basically realizes that the Holy War is the only way through. So in order to get to point...
That makes sense. It's a good thing, isn't it? That's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, that kind of justifies it a bit for me. I feel a bit better about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. But also the thing that I actually like about it, rather than I feel detracts from it, is you only learn this sort of stuff by the more you read into it.
Oh, it's great, isn't it? Yeah.
Which in other... I wouldn't enjoy that about a film if I wasn't as invested as I was.
Yeah.
It's because I just felt so wrapped up in the world that I liked it.
Right. I have a question that I've been dying to ask.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We kind of touched on it a bit earlier, but if you had to take Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter,
Yeah, right.
Star Wars,
Okay.
are there any I'm
Make them
missing?
fight.
And make them fight. Dune, plus maybe a couple more movies, if we're going to allow that. I don't know. Yeah, let's say, like, allowing for the fact that Dune is quite young as a movie series.
Or rank them.
Rank them.
Yeah.
Are there any that I've missed? Harry Potter, Lord of the
kind
Rings.
of fancy epics or
Yeah, like real big ones. Game of Thrones I would want to include in that question.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any real standout last or first places? Let's just clear up the list.
Yeah. Okay.
Rank Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Dune Part 2 and 1, and all the other parts of Dune, and the other one that I haven't said.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. I don't know. Should I try again?
Yeah.
Right. Rank Lord of the Rings,
Lord of the Rings.
Dune, Harry
The
Potter,
Does the Hobbit count
Game
in
of
Lord of the
Thrones. The Hobbit is included in the Lord of the Rings.
That's worse, that.
Okay, no, let's separate them then. All right, I'll allow you to
tell
separate
why it's
them.
interesting, because okay, if we're talking as a whole entity, what comes with those, I guess, the kind of universe, so the films, any TV shows.
Yeah, we'll include
books.
absolutely everything.
Okay. That makes it way harder.
And we will also say, like, not just enjoyment, but how good they were included. Like, which is the best whole package.
Yeah. I find that a lot easier if it's broken down into the films versus the books, because I can start to form that in my head.
Okay. Comparing the screen adaptations,
Mm-hmm.
Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and Dune, and we'll kind of allow for the fact that Dune's quite young.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you rank those for?
Lord of the Rings would be number one.
Cool. Yeah.
The screen adaptation of Harry Potter would be kind of in the middle at the moment. What's the thing about that? Game of Thrones first. I liked season 6. I did like season 5. I didn't. Season 4 was good.
Yeah, they've got so much Game of
It's
Thrones.
hard with Game of Thrones,
But you
because
have
it
to
gets
take the whole
worse,
package.
because you're literally looking at fresh in my mind is when it was bad. But I still think it would be low for me. I like the whole idea of the cinematic experience, I guess, of the others. So, which ones don't I like? Star Wars, I don't know if Star Wars has ever really been my thing massively. And there's so much of it. How much would you say you've watched of Star Wars?
Like 2 films?
Just
maybe?
2 films. Have you watched any of the
That's it.
2 out
I
of
watched
the 9
like
films?
2 episodes of Mandalorian and thought it was absolutely awful.
I quite like
hate it.
Mandalorian. Okay.
Pedro Pascal's physical acting, which is the only part of his role, is just absolutely disastrous. It's awful.
What about it?
So unintimidating, so unimposing,
Right.
so uncoordinated
Okay.
for like this elite soldier.
Okay, yeah.
He clumsied around like I would.
Okay, cool.
So sorry then, I didn't say Star Wars in that list.
Oh, okay.
So screen adaptation: Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Dune, and Harry Potter. Rank those 5.
Screen adaptations, I would have Lord of the Rings. I'd probably have it in that order. Lord of the Rings, Dune, Harry Potter,
Game of Thrones, Star Wars.
Game of Thrones, Star Wars. Maybe those 2.
So Dune is
just for the screen adaptation.
just for the screen adaptation.
And I'm not including Hobbit in the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough.
So
Do you not like the Hobbits? No.
Nah, they're all right. I've only watched them once, and I have no interest in rewatching them. Whereas
Really?
Dune already, I've watched the first one quite a few times.
Have you?
And the second one I've watched twice now.
Yeah.
Harry Potter's an interesting one, because the moment I caught up with the books, I stopped enjoying them as much. It was like in my head, it's like the first example when you realise that films aren't as good as the books.
Yeah.
Because I remember the books would be my favourite of all of those.
Yeah.
I didn't really like the Lord of the Rings books. Haven't read Dune. And I read the first 2 Game of Thrones. And then I realised I preferred Alt Shift X videos. I was like, these are way better. And they kind of theorise on stuff that's never going to happen.
The Game of Thrones books are structured a bit pretentiously with this whole thing about, like, from the perspective of each character per chapter, and apparently it can become quite annoying at times.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I found it annoying, unless by annoying you mean if you start getting invested in one character's storyline and then they just completely go on to someone else
for like five chapters.
Yeah, and particularly if it's someone who's, maybe their internal dialogue you don't like as much. Interesting side note. What do you reckon about this whole... Have you looked into the fact that George R.R. Martin's just never releasing the next book?
No.
Dear mate.
He's just not doing it.
No, but he just keeps, like... He's basically put it off. The last one came out in 2011.
Yeah.
Which was... It came out before...
13 years.
It came out before the first series.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like, just before the first series...
So how many out of how many has he done?
He's done, supposedly, his plan was to make 7.
Yep.
And he's done 5. And he is 75, I think. And it's gone something like this. It's gone like 90. So the first 3 were like 1996, 1998, 2001 or something. And then there was like, I think there was like a 3 or 4 year gap between the 3rd and the 4th.
Okay.
And then the 4th and the 5th, there was I think, 5 year gap, I want to say.
Okay.
It was 2011.
Yeah.
And then he's
just not written anymore.
But he's done like loads of other stuff.
Good man.
And every time people ask him about it, like, it's getting to a point where people are just starting to realise that the going thought is that it's gone a bit out of his control.
In terms of what?
So he refers to himself as, I can't remember the 2... He says writers are kind of pigeonholed into, I think, architects and gardeners.
Okay.
He definitely says gardeners, that's the one he is. But architects have everything planned out and they know exactly how they're going to be finishing it. And with that in mind, because everything is structured, it's almost like the scientists and the artists sort of argument, but they can work. It's quite easy for them to write because they just need to basically
complete what
put
has
the
already
words
been
into
put into place.
the compartments that they already know. Whereas gardeners will create characters and let them grow, and they'll surprise them, which sounds like
Tarantino talks about that a lot.
Yeah, and some people, if you keep it in control, it's definitely more. I imagine it's more enriching. I mean, I don't know what.
It's more organic,
but
isn't
it's
it?
probably more enriching, at least for the person writing them. Imagine how interesting it would be when you're surprised by your own characters.
I'm surprised by shit I do all the time. Like, did I really do that? No way.
I was thinking of making a joke. I was like, I'm just going to keep this clean. But exactly, like, he's basically started to get not only surprised by his characters. Ooh. but also he's basically made too many, and it's not like a garden anymore, it's like a wildfire. We digress. Dune 2.
Sorry, back to Dune 2, although that was really interesting. I'll tell you what could kick us off. The sandworm scene, riding the sandworm for Timothy Chalamet. So this is the coming of age moment for Timothy, right?
Yeah.
He's being accepted by the Fremen because it's kind of the final rite of passage is he has to ride this sandworm, right? It sounds a bit weird, but if you watch the film, it makes sense.
It's really cool.
Now, this is like one of my favorite scenes in the whole film, and it's absolutely it was ridiculously good. I thought that the comment where it was like, he was going up to wait for it, and they were like, "Call a big one," and I was like, "Oh, he's obviously going to call a big one, isn't he?" And then still, I was like, "Oh, not that big," and it just felt so tacky.
Yeah.
It really annoyed me because other than that, the directing of that scene is ridiculous. Like, if you watch it on a big screen with big speakers, it is the most immensely immersive, fantastic moment ever, where you are just thrown into this violent mess that the character's in, and I just thought that was one of the best scenes ever.
Well, it's consistent with your point about, okay, does Paul have too much plot armor? That's almost an example where it's not just plot armor, but it's like, it's it's so obvious that you're like, oh, the biggest one ever.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just plot armor, but he also is basically everything that at any point of conflict in the story, he basically excels, and we come to expect it. And what I wouldn't say what saves it, but what makes this, in my opinion, enhances the story about this rather than makes it generic and tired is the way that the whole package has come together by Denis and by Hans Zimmer and cinematographers and whoever was involved in this. It is gorgeous. It's so well designed. It's so emotive in terms of the scope, the cinematography, the shot selection, and the bloody music in the background.
The sound effects, the music, the
visual
costume,
effects.
everything
Unreal.
is just...
So
it's made by someone with vision. That's how you could tell that somebody had a vision for it.
And this is why I think it's important almost to know what the purpose of the film is. The purpose is to say this is a messiah and this is the dangers of it. So then you start to appreciate, okay, of course things are going to go well for him. Of course I'm not expecting that this conflict will actually have a bad ending at any point.
Yeah.
Like when he gets into these individual battles throughout. When he dies, I expect him to come back. When he does the sandworm, yes, I expect him to do well.
Yeah.
When he fights... Fred Jackson
Rioja,
at the end,
or whatever his bloody name is. The bold
Fred Ratchet at the end. We expect him to come through, but it's so if you know that it's the Messiah element of it, we expect it to come through, but the enjoyment then comes out of how it's presented to us, and it's just so different and vibrant, and really.
I mean,
really
the title of the review which I prepared before this was watch it on the biggest screen with the biggest speakers you can, because like the thing that made it one of the best films one of the best films I've ever watched, not necessarily one that I've enjoyed the most, but one of the best films I've ever watched is the vision and the attention to detail and how immersive it is. One of the great examples that highlighted to me why it was so good was when I think it was an interview with Denis, and he was saying that the sandworm shows itself. This might actually have been Dune 1, but it's quite good at illustrating what it is.
I know what you mean.
The sandworm stands up and looks over Paul, and it's this massive, towering, intimidating figure. Yeah. And Denis said, I don't want it to roar. I want it to sound like a leaning building. And and you don't notice that when you're watching it, but it makes the world of difference. Like if you imagine the scenes with the sandworms towering over it and it roars, it's just a completely different thing, isn't it? Yeah. It's like it just is it's a very different experience.
Oh, hi, Paul.
That's what I mean by vision.
Exactly right.
That's what I mean by the
scale was so important in how he created the sandworms, a really important visual element of the books, but also like the ship that the Emperor came on, and his use of the way he designed it, or the way it was storyboarded, and how it was realized. You really got a sense of scale, didn't you?
It was, the sandworms were one of the things that really stood out for me as being like, I just feel this pit in my stomach of intimidation by this thing. It was just so impressive, and
which is part of the reason why, like, in my head, I was like, do I prefer the first one? Because the first time you see the sandworm in the first one, like, it is something. It's different. It's amazing, and in this one, I kind of had to remind myself of the elements that Dune 2 is a better film in my opinion. I think there's more to it.
Okay.
And all the visual things I liked about the first one. It's not just a case of your standard sequel where, okay, let's just do it again but bigger. This is from a story. Yeah. Which if any the best sequels tend to be where they actually were planned by someone who wrote a book about the sequel. But it's from a story, and when it expands on things and aggrandizes them, makes them larger, it's actually considered. It's part of the plot. It's not something like, oh, we know they like the sandworms with the first one, so how about we do 3 sandworms? It's actually a case of this makes sense for the character. This makes sense for how this story is going to go. And I think that the reason why I'm an R about whether I like the first one is more just, I genuinely, the first time I watched it was like, I'm invested. I really was. Yeah, I'm
intimidated. Yeah. I am excited. I am terrified. I am everything that they want me to be.
Mhm.
Yeah,
For sure.
I think the sandworms are a good example, but there are a lot of things. I would say probably the one visual that really let me down were the eyes. I thought the eyes looked kind of crappy. The blue eyes.
Oh, the blue eyes. Right. Yeah. No, I get what you mean. They're not.
They were
fine.
beating this drum about how brilliant it was that they used AI for this one. They were like, it was great. We used AI for this one.
Read up into this.
So in the first film, they frame by frame made the eyes blue, right, with post. With this one, they were like, oh, it was way easier. We just showed it a couple of eyes, made them blue, and then the AI did the rest. And I was like, oh, so that's why it looks shit then. I mean, I don't remember the first one. I wasn't watching the first one with the frame of mind of I'm going to be rating it on the Mate Night podcast, so I wasn't watching it quite so closely. But when I was watching the second one, I thought, you know what? For a budget of couple $100 million, this is ridiculous. Yeah, these eyes just look a bit crappy. And when you take into consideration just how ridiculously good the sandworms were and the Emperor's whole, the vision of the Emperor's whole like orb thing, and how that floats over the city, and everything is right visually for me. Everything apart from the eyes. The eyes just looked really crap. Yeah,
fair enough. The eyes, I'm not too keen on either. There are a couple of elements from the first one as well where I did also think that looks quite obviously CGI, and it's interesting how that is compared to the worms, which they almost seem photorealistic, right? Specifically, I'm talking about, any of the scenes where they come up from under the underground.
Yeah,
there's in Paul's visions in the first one, he has visions of himself basically fighting the Holy War, and then there's a shot where he turns and it's some unknown warrior, and then their face mask comes off and it's Paul.
No,
with blue eyes. And I remember thinking that looks shit. But he does that, and then you've got you don't really mind that so much.
No.
But I tell you what I absolutely loved about the second film is the Harkonnen scene, like on the Harkonnen planet. What did you think? Other than the fact that he probably the actual fight itself,
the actual fight
visuals.
separate to the fight itself, I thought it was brave, and therefore I kind of respect that. But personally, like, I just kind of felt like I was spoon-fed the Harkonnens, right? Okay. I felt like every scene you introduced when they cut someone's throat, they were just bad guys. They wore black. They were on a black and white planet with big gothic-looking buildings, and everything was bad and evil. And so, like, I think that when I then watched the scene on the Harkonnens planet where it was like, oh, it's black and white, what a surprise, I was kind of like, for God's sakes, can you not make these guys a bit more complicated than this? And I thought that as a directing decision, it was confident and brave. I'm assuming you saw this, but it's shot in infrared, right?
Right.
So it's black and white and infrared overlaid over each other.
Okay.
And that's how it looks.
How they've managed
so
to
strange. And the reason that he did that is because he didn't want the sand in the pit to look like Arrakis.
Right.
So he said, the sand in the pit, it looks too much like Arrakis. Let's try recording it in black and white and infrared. And it was very, very brave as a director, because, like, you can't go back from that. Once you've shot it in that style, you can't then add the color back in. And this is obviously a very highly anticipated movie, and it's not really been done before. So there was a lot of cool stuff about it, but for me, it just didn't hit.
Really? I think it's amazing. Like that whole, I remember genuinely, edge of the seat, this Arrakis world that we're in for the first hour and a half, maybe, or maybe less of the movie. I remember being like, wow, this is a really welcome break going into this completely different world.
Yeah.
And getting a sense of the world building as well. Like the first two films, we've done a tiny bit on the Atreides' home planet, which I can't remember the name of. And then we went to Arrakis, and we've been in Arrakis for, at that point, 2 hours at least of film time, probably more. And so, between the two films. And so then to have that real break and have such a different visual. And so, I don't know how much you read into this, but the idea around probably why it looks so odd, being the black sun causes people to...
Not aware of this.
So, you know how in the fighting pit they almost seemed quite gamified? They looked like they were almost fully CG and really marble-like. But then when they were out of when they were under the cover of, in a building or something, they looked normal.
Okay.
They were still kind of black and white, but it's very...
It's different.
Yeah, it's weird how much they look a certain kind of glossy...
Yeah.
And that's because the black sun apparently causes that visual.
Okay.
So the black and white planet is caused by the sun that they have.
Right.
And then when they're indoors, they look normal, even though they're weird looking.
But
they don't look
kind
like
of
black and white.
real life colour back to them.
Yeah, it basically washes out any colour and it's just black or white, which is quite interesting. And you can actually see, if you rewatch it, which I'd recommend, you can see, so when the Baron comes in to watch and when the Bene Gesserit who are observing him come in, you can actually see kind of the moment they go from being in the sunlight to not. So not in the sunlight too, because they go basically marbly.
That is the kind
out.
of attention to detail that Denis
Amazing.
brings to the whole
absolutely
film.
amazing. And yeah, I remember thinking, wow, this is a really nice.
Yeah.
I forgot how, when I was in it, I didn't feel tired, but I was clearly tired of being in the desert landscape.
I agree.
I was like, this is a nice stop in the middle.
This is a nice break.
Yeah, we're going to see what other people are up to. I wonder what bloody Christopher Walken's up to.
Yeah.
Wow, have you heard of Paul? Have you heard of the mother Adine? It's Desert Mouse.
That was a
Mate, he was so bad. But I liked Skarsgård. I liked.
He was.
Butler.
That character and performance of the
Baron,
fat floating man, Baron. Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved the character. I loved the performance. I loved the black bath thing that they were keeping him in. Do you know what? Okay, go on then.
No, this is yours. Because it's your film.
His two favorite films. You've seen this. So Denis Villeneuve's two favorite films: 2001: Space Odyssey, which watching Dune you can kind of see, and Apocalypse Now. And the scene where the Baron floats up out of the water the scene is an homage to. There's quite a lot of these. Is an homage to the scene in Apocalypse Now where he comes out of the water. My favorite scene in Apocalypse Now, where he comes out of the water, and funnily enough, I didn't recognize it in the movie. I didn't look at it and go, "That's a hat tip to Apocalypse Now." I just completely missed it.
I can't remember if I did or not, because I found out. If I didn't, I found out about it quite quickly after. But because that's in the first one. Do they do it in the second one as well? I can't remember.
Oh, I don't know. I actually don't know. I just kept showing me the scene and how it looked. And
one element that I didn't like, and it was one of the only elements after the first time watching it. I went with Harrison, Jen, and Midge, his mate in Leeds. And when we came out, the only thing that I was like, okay, that wasn't that great. Other than walking, like me,
other than walking.
Me and Harrison were sat next to each other, and every time Walken would say something, we just started laughing. Like, do you know about this little rat in the desert?
Brilliant,
and he was like, we haven't heard about him, my Lord Emperor. Well, he's out there. Do you know who he could be? Anyway, so we were just like chuckling about him just being so out of place.
God.
So that bit, but I think a lot of people spotted that. The one thing that I came out of it and was like, that doesn't make it all that much, or I thought was a bit stupid, was so we've got Rabban is running Arrakis and he's trying to exterminate the Fremen. He's not doing a very good job. Muad'Dib is running riot, and then they're basically gaining more control and to punish him and also to put it under control and get the spice under control, importantly. The Baron decides to get old Freddie
Ralph.
Like, you can be the new, how about Arrakis?
Yeah.
So he then goes on to Arrakis, and now he's going to put some order in. And what he does, Rabban has been there for a long time.
Yep.
And been totally ineffective at quelling this.
Desperately trying to get things under control.
Killing his minions, going out into the field.
Killing minions in the Harkonnen thing is not like...
Just adding to the suspense.
They do that
Killing
all the time.
minions, which is fairly common.
It's a bad role to get.
So he's doing that, killing minions. He's going out and he's trying to fight... At certain points, he's going wild, isn't he? He's actually going out into the field and risking the life of more of his men and himself. And then
to take on the Fremen.
To take on specifically Muad'Dib, who he's shouting about. which I did find cool, by the way, how you could see his legend growing.
Yes.
Like they knew of his name.
Yes.
They didn't like sugarcoat, and they literally, it went from a point of he started to get a bit of fame within the Fremen. Over the next couple of scenes, you can tell he's had such a splash that the Harkonnen know of this mythical Muad'Dib. The Emperor's heard of Muad'Dib. Very cool. But anyway, he goes out, he's failed, comes back.
Cannot, for the life of him.
Can't do anything. And then
Ralph.
Freddie Ralph comes in, he gets given, the first thing he does is just get a ship, go over to a known Fremen location and just bomb the shit out of it. And then literally the Baron is with him and he just goes, good old-fashioned artillery.
Why didn't I think of that?
They're just like, we'll just breeze over the fight.
Freddie Ralph turns up and literally within one scene he's like, why don't we just bomb them?
And it actually affects the whole...
Oh,
it makes Paul decide, okay, I'm going to go down south to the desert.
Oh, they're serious now. They've decided to actually use their weapons.
Probably could have done that.
Oh, here's the thing that Faye and I disagreed on of on this. To think that they are tens of thousands of years in the future, right? You would have thought that they would have come up with better ways of fighting strategy-wise and combat-wise than running at each other with swords in massive groups, right? That annoyed me a bit because, like, yeah, you've got your shields, and so guns are less effective, but the first species to come up with a gun that overpowers that shield, then when you guys all stand in a massive army outside we just shoot at you. Like, they kept doing battle scenes like in Lord of the Rings where you'd run at each other with swords, and it seems like such an ineffective way of waging war.
I've got an answer to this, and I think so. You kind of alluded to it. So the whole idea around the Duneverse is that they were at a similar stage of evolution to us, where artificial intelligence was first starting to be used, and then they immediately realised the dangers of it and just said, okay, no more machine learning, artificial intelligence. That's done. And so thousands of years pass. And in order to essentially have the same effects of machine learning, different humans have evolved to have different qualities. So you've got, I think, Mensat, they're called, are basically like supercomputers, which are able to mathematically calculate anything.
Okay.
There's a few of those in the first film. I don't know if there are any in the second one. You've got the Bene Gesserit, who are able to essentially completely control their bodies. They've got the voice, which they're able to use to control people. You've got kind of the Harkonnen and Sardaukar, different warrior planets, Atreides, all of these people.
They got their thing.
So what they have done is they've basically created a lack of a requirement for technology that can think for itself. And one of the elements of that is the creation of the shields, which prevent quick-moving objects from hurting anyone. And then only the slow-moving objects can go through. And this is why they only work with this is why they only use swords, which I know you were alluding to. The thing I think about it is this, like, okay, there are probably ways around it which would make sense, but the concept is something that Herbert thought of and is quite clearly a very cool concept. So I don't actually put much stock in thinking too much into how you could go around it, when realistically I get the idea.
I don't like it when armies run at each other. It annoys me. I just think it's such a dumb way of going to war.
Yeah, I know. It was a bit like, okay, we're all just going to pincer them from this point. But the nuance, I guess, was that they had tricked the Emperor to coming down and basically trapped him in this pit.
Yeah.
And we can go.
Which was brilliant strategy. It was really cool. It was like, we've got this sandstorm coming. We're going to knock out the defense with our nukes so that the sandstorm and then we're going to... And then what we're going to do is we're going to run at them with swords. And it's like, what? Like, do you not have any other better way of attacking this massive group than just, like, inevitably killing at least the first 10 rows of Fremen that you throw at them?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they came out with sandworms, didn't they? They attacked them with sandworms. The Fremen came from underneath. That was kind of cool.
Why run at them? If they didn't run at them, what would they have done? They'd have just stood there and died the same as they did in the film.
Yeah, I suppose they could have just blown them all up.
They could have just blown them all up.
Well, Paul does need to get to the...
Yeah. So they have to be a little careful.
Yeah.
But Paul, who's like, oh, I really care about the Fremen, is like, and I've got these bombs, which, if I blow up over there, throw rocks at these guys, so that could work. I've got all these... I've probably got about 1,000 other options I could consider.
Yeah, okay.
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell all of my least favourite Fremen to run at them. With swords.
And my girlfriend.
And my girlfriend being right at the
in
front.
a strop with me.
That'll show her.
Yeah, okay, so here's my thought, and here's why I liked it. I felt like it was pretty anti-fantasy trope of we're going to have a big battle at the end because they mopped the floor with them.
That's true, yeah.
Yes, maybe their war tactics could have been improved, but the point being, like, we've watched Lord of the Rings does a fucking great job of the final battle. So it's good, but it's just very different, this, which I like.
Yeah.
You've got your one that we didn't really mention in that list, by the way, was the Avengers. So Endgame.
Okay.
That is very much all of our guys and all of your guys all together.
Run at each other in the park.
It felt like I've seen a video on the stakes of that being worse than Lord of the Rings Two Towers, and I agreed. It was very much like here's this person rolling out and they get to do their bit, and then this person does their bit. And in the end, it won't really matter because we'll all just do something that wipes everyone out at once. So I really liked it. This was a case of everything had been in place. They'd strategized around. Paul basically became an omniscient god.
That's great.
And was able to get in place. I know what's going to happen, and it's going to be they're going to come down. All of this is going to be in play. They didn't even show they showed kind of the start of the fight, but essentially it was just, okay, Paul's here now, kills the Baron.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I liked
that was great. That was so cool.
Scene.
Killing the Baron was brilliant. The way they all watched him. That was the one moment where Timothée Chalamet's imposing scenes felt real. And I think for me it was because they covered him in costume and makeup.
You know what, on that actually, so I want to make sure I'm clear on my thoughts on Chalamet. I think he was good.
Yeah.
I think it was, and there were bits that he had which were supposed to be hyped up bits, which I felt hyped up in. Like the scene where he goes south and they're all in that big,
that's quite cool, yeah.
And he starts just calling people out was sick. I thought when he says, when it all culminates and they're like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to bring water to Arrakis, or however he finishes it off. I was like, yes, we are.
And he goes up to that.
I took my top off.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. And then the other one is just before the battle when he comes out and just goes, like, he puts his fist in the air. So like an army of Fremen just going,
let's go, my dude. Yeah.
That is, I thought it was sick. I just think that, he didn't necessarily need to be that good for that to be amazing. Yeah. And maybe there could have been a few actors
who could have done a better job potentially.
He was good. He wasn't bad.
Yeah.
Okay, one thing on the battle, I loved that they wiped the floor with him. I liked that bit.
I agree.
I pretty much liked that they cut most of it. I think it was unnecessary. I liked that was cut. I didn't like the final fight between Rabban and Gurney. I thought that was kind of pointless. So,
do you know what? I can't even remember it that well. Which
it
says it.
It was like, considering they did a good job of raising and lowering the stakes at certain points, that one it was kind of pointless. They're just like,
I didn't really like Gurney. I've never really liked Gurney in any of it. He was all right, but he was a bit. He was a bit of a kind of trope, and he was a bit of a kind of like, I don't know. I just wasn't that convinced by his character. No. I kind of could have just not had him in it.
Do you know what he was good for? He was good for when Paul's not just hyping up the Fremen, but he's also hyping up the Atreides, because Gurney is the only Atreides left. So when at one point Paul puts his ring on when he's basically giving his hype speech to all the Fremen and announcing himself as he's the Kwisatz Haderach. What do they call it? Do they call him Muad'Dib, or is that the name?
Who?
They
the Fremen.
Yeah, they've got a name for him as their Messiah. What's that name? Do you remember?
There's Lisan al-Gaib.
Lisan al-Gaib.
I love that, by the way. It's got such a song to it.
Nice.
Lisan al-Gaib.
So when they say him as the Lisan al-Gaib, like when he just points at that guy and just tells him about his nan's dream.
That I was gonna say that.
And then the
that
guy
was so good.
Lisan al-Gaib, let's go. And it was still God just at any point just being like, the Lisan al-Gaib is too modest to say Lisan al-Gaib, as is written. It's class. Absolutely class.
No matter how hard Timothy tries to convince him.
You know what's really funny? So in the Alt Shift X video that I've referenced a few times, they go through. Well, I don't know if it's in that one actually. There's one which goes through no spoilers the whole of Dune, part 1. So if you watch the first film, it doesn't spoil any of the second part, so the second film. Would highly recommend anyone who's not watched part 2, watch that, because it just greatly enriches your understanding of part 1 and makes you so excited for part 2.
Shift X.
He is top.
If you enjoy something and he's done a video on it, watch the video.
Yeah.
He'll do a better job of it than the production.
Just don't watch any of his theory videos, because he ruins.
Because they're so much better than the authors.
They're always way better than the actual thing. So
what a guy.
Watch that, and then he also released one, which this was naughty of me. I was so invested in Dune, and I'd watched the first one, knew that the next one wasn't coming out for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I'd watched his video, which only went through any plot that was relevant to that first part of the first book. He then released like a 10-15 minute video, which is just the rest of the plot of all 6 books of Dune, and I just watched it.
You, Freddie.
I watched it and I was like, that's fucking mint.
Let's go. Yeah,
so
okay.
I watched it, and interestingly, it doesn't really matter too much, because it sort of changes. The first 2 books, I think, are kind of a story in themselves, and it almost becomes a bit different after that.
Okay.
And it gets a bit more psychedelic and weird as well. But it didn't ruin this film for me at all. But one of the things I did remember watching it was that they basically he made it clear that Stilgar becomes like a radical. He's his like most fervent admirer and fan of the Lisan Al Gaib. He's like a religious zealot, basically.
Yeah.
And I remember watching, I was like, how are they going to do that? Because the first one, in the first film, you would never get that sense.
Yeah.
And there are subtle things that he does in the first one where he basically references the fact that he thinks Paul's a bit special. But then in the second one, he basically goes from that to being like when,
I'm convinced.
When he shows Lady Jessica the big pool of all of the dead bodies, the water, and he's like the first way you're able to tell that maybe he thinks he's something, and Jessica's like, do you believe in Paul? He's like, there are signs.
Yeah.
And then literally the next scene from then on, he's just going, listen, I'm going to
Yeah,
he's great.
He's brilliant. I didn't quite understand with that, and maybe you'll be able to explain it to me. The scene, so there's the scene where he talks to Lady Jessica in front of the pool of people's water that had been drained from when they died, this kind of holy pool. And he says to her, I want you to be the Reverend Mother, the leader of our people, religious leader kind of
something
thing.
like that, yeah.
A very, very important figure. But the scene prior to that is him in a council with seemingly no authority, where none of them believe anything about the Lisan Al Gaib, and they all think that she's just like a spy. And then the next scene, he then puts her in this like ridiculously powerful position.
So what? Yeah, I get what you mean. Here's my understanding, which might not be entirely right, but he's the only one who can speak for that siege at the main. You know, later when they go to the main thing. So I do think he is the leader of that whole siege.
He's a decision maker.
Yeah. So when they're talking, kind of shooting him down, as far as I know, he is actually still the leader.
Okay.
With regards to the Reverend Mother side of it, that has to be a Bene Gesserit, and so I'm pretty sure when Jessica came along, they probably were like, well,
that makes
our
sense.
Bene Gesserit is dying, and we have to have a Reverend Mother has to be a Bene Gesserit. So, I mean, we don't really have any other takers. So, I think that would probably be something.
Okay, that's fair enough then. One of the things that I wanted to praise it for, film 1 and the first half of film 2, Jessica was annoying, whiny, didn't like her. And then she got the face tattoos and became this manipulative, evil, fantastic, brilliant character. And she was so cool in the second half.
So you didn't like her in the first...
when she was like crying when he was doing his hand pain thing. And like she just kind of a bit weird and like just kind of... Everyone's just kind of like, shut up, Jessica. And it just, I don't get anything from her.
She's really, have you watched any interviews of her outside that she's really cool? She's like, well cool. But yeah, I get what you mean. I think in terms of the annoying side of it, she was obviously directed in the box scene, which is sick. And also, have you watched, there's a breakdown by Denis Villeneuve of the box scene on YouTube? Mate, so good. He basically just makes you realise how passionate he is about Dune. Like, he was asked by Vanity Fair to break down a scene from Dune. He decides the box scene, which is a very famous scene. from the book anyway. And he just is clear how important he felt this scene had to be and how much effort and thought he put into it.
Yeah.
And there he goes like, this is exactly how I saw it when I read the book by Frank Herbert at 14.
It's a pretty good accent, that, mate. I'll take it.
So he put so much thought into it. And he explains there that the reason Jessica cries so much is because all Bene Gesserit have to go through that test. So it's not just she's upset because Paul's in trouble. She is remembering how much pain she was in. It was obviously so horrifying, this pain, that it's making her like visibly. I get what you mean though. It's like
she's a bit spidery and annoying and fine. Like, you don't have to have every character really cool at the start.
She becomes quite funny in the second one where she's just like chatting to her belly.
Oh yeah, that was a bit. And I think it's important to distinguish when it's character, writing, acting, whatever.
Yeah, right.
This is a character thing. This is the writing thing. But the whole like, oh yeah, my baby says he breath smells. It's not me. It's like, oh, my baby thinks that you should do this. It's like, yeah, okay. Maybe you're just being passive aggressive. And
I found it pretty funny. Like, I mean, because they explain, because at first she's like, I can hear her. She speaks to me. Yeah. And you're like, wow, that's pretty horrifying. And then like the next scene, she's just like, Paul's all right.
Yeah, yeah.
She's not wandering along.
She whispers from the deep.
Whispers from the deep.
She said it's a good day. It's a nice sunny day today.
You've gained a bit of weight.
Paul's hair looks nice this morning.
Do you find it weird? Like, there's that one scene where she goes to the south to basically lead, be the Reverend
in her
Mother.
cool, like, sandworm cabin.
Yeah, very cool.
Which is cool. I like.
With her blue eyes that are not very good.
And her face tats.
So she does that, and then Paul's like, I'm not going. I refuse to be swept up in what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then, she goes, all right, fine, whatever. And then, like, the baby speaks through her. And it's just like, remember your promise. And it's like the weirdest fucking thing. I remember being like, holy shit.
What the fuck?
That's fucking weird.
Yeah, that whole thing.
We see you on the other.
That whole thing was just so weird.
And also there was another one of those where I was again like, all right, maybe I wouldn't have done that when, at the end scene where he kills Austin Butler's character.
Yeah.
And she has like a weird psychic conversation with the Reverend Mother. I was like,
yeah.
I said this when I wrote that script about internal dialogue, and I was like, it actually made me appreciate how well he'd done Denis in the first film and the majority of the second film in not having any real internal dialogue scenes and still being this clear in his vision and presenting his vision so well.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the fact that they had one and it was so fucking shit made me just appreciate it more. That at least it's only happened once right at the end.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that Denis Villeneuve basically it's almost a masterpiece. Like, it's almost there is his attention to detail, his passion for the project, his vision, everything is just so well done from his perspective.
Yeah.
You can tell it was made by somebody who loves what they were doing.
For sure.
And you get that sense when you're watching it. And so, like, there was the odd little bit where maybe I would say, the blue eyes could have been better, and there were odd bits, but actually, on the whole, that was one of the best jobs as far as I've seen a director do. Like, one where the directing has stood out to me as being like, wow, you can see it's come together. Yeah, with somebody at the front who's leading it with a vision.
For sure, I think that other than the gripes I had were, they just wasn't
little bits that stopped it from being a perfect movie.
In all honesty, the gripes for me just meant that I prefer Lord of the Rings to it. That's the level. I enjoyed it so much, and I actually felt so I don't want to say like blessed, but I just felt very pleased. I can't think of the word that I'm trying to think of. Lucky. I felt very lucky and privileged. That's it. I'm trying to think of the word privileged. Fucking blessed. So I felt privileged that I got the chance to watch this at the cinema. When he reminded me when the first one came out, and this one, like, just even more so, that what it would have been like when Lord of the Rings came out, and just having the chance to experience that on the big screen for the first time.
I imagine it was on
and
par as
yeah.
a cinema experience.
This is definitely in my lifetime the one that I
It's a generational.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. It was a real
Did you ever
privilege.
get to watch it in IMAX at all?
No, and that's I'd watch it again. Maybe go and watch it in IMAX.
I might go.
Did you watch it in IMAX?
That's the only thing that I've watched it in was in IMAX.
Right.
And I think this is one of the reasons why I ended up talking myself down from the score I gave it. Was it lends itself to being on the biggest speakers with the biggest screen, and if you watched it on your phone at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and you took it for the things that remained, then it's not like I came out of the cinema above 9, and then thought if I watched it on a phone, what would be left? But I watching it in like without a doubt. Watch it in IMAX. Watch it on the biggest screen, the biggest speakers. Just do, because it was a complete the sandworms were intimidating, but when your seat is vibrating from the sound, the depth of the sound, the Hans Zimmer sounds that he's put together for this, vibrating as this thing towers over you in this screen, which is just your whole field of view. It's a completely immersive experience.
Yeah, I think that just as a package, it's something to be experienced, as you say. You mentioned there the Hans Zimmer score, which we'll probably should put a pin in this first half an hour. But that's the sound that That's just part of
here's
the
a
whole...
comment that I heard, and I was like, I didn't think of this. And this is a review which, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to reference and say who it was. But they said the sound design... This is kind of a little bit in my own words as well, but the sound design was on point. The sound design could not be faulted. But you're not really going to get anyone leaving the cinema humming the Dune theme tune anytime soon. No. There's kind of like a thing there that's not quite been hit, where it's like this kind of thing that everyone remembers, the sound. I never remember which one. You talk about score and soundtrack, things like that, but there wasn't like a song where you come away from and you're like, that was... Interstellar, you know what song you're thinking of with Interstellar.
Yeah, so I mean, with it, I don't know if it's the case. Maybe in the second one, but in the first one particularly, I definitely came away with a wah wah wah, you're deep.
Yes and no, but are you going to be humming that to yourself over the next few months?
That's what I look in the mirror when I get out of the shower.
It's funny because you sing it and I do know what you mean.
So I think that and just the whole all of that, the desert,
it's great. It's
amazing,
brilliant.
I get what you mean. It's not, but Zimmer's never been like a John Williams. Like you're going to remember, you're going to remember the melody of a. You're going to remember a Jaws.
He mentioned John Williams, so I don't know what's the kind of main sort of like what's the main 3 Hans Zimmer against the main 3 John Williams, like the ones that I might know.
Okay, so one that is melodic from Hans Zimmer, and I'm going to preface this by saying I know a bit, but I won't
more than me. So you can tell me about it.
I wouldn't profess myself to be an expert about this, but Hans Zimmer, in my opinion, is typically great at enriching an experience through like your sound design elements, but it's still a score. Like there's still like the drum heavy beats in Dune. In terms of John Williams is very heavy on amazing melody, orchestrated melody. So examples, Dune, I think that Interstellar is actually Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
But for me, I always think of Hans Zimmer as more like Dune Inception with a wah, being creative in terms of ambience without necessarily...
Almost like the sound effects.
Yeah, almost like for me. But one that is him, that is on the other end of the spectrum, maybe maybe the best score in cinema history for me, Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that earlier.
Unbelievable. But it's very much on that end of the John Williams, which he's...
So what's John Williams done? What are the kind of ones that I might know?
You know what's wild is like he's been nominated, I think, for... last time I actually counted once on IMDb, and it was well over 40.
Can you list any off the top of your head?
Yeah. So Star Wars, Harry Potter, Jaws,
wow, right, okay,
Jurassic Park,
Jesus,
a lot of the Spielberg ones. So Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, which is mega.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the ones that come to mind. But when
those
you're
are
talking
ones
about,
that I know.
when you're talking about the E.T., when you're talking about soundtrack to your life in film, John Williams is probably number one.
That's been a useful conversation for me because I think that the lack of a song to come away from it, and this is just we have to come to an agreement, but when I was thinking about sound, I was like, is it a 10 or a 9 for me? And with that explanation, I personally would be more comfortable giving it a 10 now, because the thing is, like, when the sound in that movie was ridiculous, like the actual I've made a few videos, as you know, right?
Yeah.
And what you start to realize is you, as a human being, where your main sense is your sense of sight, really, that's what stands out. You think that that's what goes into these things, and then you kind of forget a little bit about it. But actually, if you take a video with and without sound, it's an entirely different experience. Really? And Dune, one of the things that stood out to me was the thopter noise. Yeah. Right? I saw a video about how they made that, do you know? No. Take a stick about 6 inches high and then create like a it's really quite weird, yeah. Imagine like a round stick about six inches high, and then maybe like a scaffolding of other sticks at a right angle to it, on the end, almost like a flag shape, but the flag itself is more like 8 inches. So it's like this kind of, and it spins. Right. Okay, so you've got the handle stick, and then you've got this scaffolding stick thing that spins around it, and then you put elastic bands on it. And you spin it round, and they go. And if you watch the films now, you can see that it's like these elastic bands going like. And there's like these sound design engineers like, we were coming up with it for months and months, and then one of us just went, "What about this?" And then they just started spinning it around.
It sounds like if you pardon the pun, it sounds like a very fun job being a sound engineer.
Sounds great, doesn't it?
Yeah, and if you watch those videos of scenes where the sound editing is actually shown how they make. It's
great.
Yeah, it's really fun watching. I need a break, so we'll cut
break, then part 2. See you later.
See you in a bit, Dave.
We're back.
We on.
We're back.
We
so,
live.
You wanted to hear my review,
yes,
and then we wanted your laptop fan noisy, and then we wanted to do the section where we objectively rank Dune Part 2.
Do you want to put our scores in?
So, gut feel, enjoyment reaction for Fred was a 9.2. And for Jamie was an 8.2.
Perfect. So I think this would be a good segue into your review to see. I like that Jamie's been interested in writing reviews, which we haven't done before for any of these. We typically just score stuff and talk about it, but we thought it'd be quite cool to see if the review that you originally put matches up to maybe how I feel now. Yeah, how you're feeling after talking about it for an hour and 37 minutes.
Yeah. The review was a big part about just kind of like helping me organize how I felt about the movie.
I'd be interested in seeing how you approached it as well, like how you approached a review.
Of course. I mean, I thought hard about it. Look,
there you go.
How funny do I want it to be? A tiny bit.
A tiny bit funny.
A tiny bit. It's not funny. It's not funny. It's not funny at all.
Oh, should I read it, or do you want to read it? What would you rather?
All right, yeah, go on. Let's see you read it. Let's see you read it. Okay. I think that what's going to happen is that a lot of I didn't put as much time into the grammar to make it readable for somebody else because I kind of knew how I was going to read it.
Yeah, fair.
So you might find that the message doesn't come across quite so clearly, but it should be good fun anyway.
We'll see if it's any good.
Can you see that? Do you need this moving a bit closer?
Oh, that's all right. I can see from here.
All right. I don't think you're able to. Make sure you're nice and close to the mic.
Okay.
So that title is included.
So, Jamie's review of Dune 2. Watch it, title in bold. Watch it with the biggest screen and speakers that you can. I figured out what it is that's wrong with Dune Part 2. Okay, straight off the bat. He's coming in hot. I figured out what it is that's wrong with Dune Part 2. Why it is that I left the cinema with a niggling emptiness at the end. Ooh, that's interesting. The stories spend time developing this fascinatingly complicated scenario for the protagonist, Paul Atreides. Paul really wants to be a good person. He understands the risks of power, but as the stories develop, it becomes clear that the universe is going to be putting this into the test. That was my reading, not Jamie's spelling there. Putting this to the test and into the test. Firstly, it provides him with an unimaginable amount of power through both of his parents' factions and his influence over the Fremen people. Then he is witness to his family's betrayal and the slaughter of the people that he loved. And on top of all of that, it gives him his mum's permission to fuck shit up. There's the comedy. Comedy, everyone.
We got some in, a tiny bit.
So let's just kind of break that down a bit. So the story is developing, spend time, fascinatingly complicated scenario. So is this a bit of exposition around what the scenario is? He wants to be a good person.
The thing that I enjoyed about how it made this very complicated, especially like this moral question, like here's a big betrayal, loads of power, and your mum's permission. Like, what are you going to do about it?
Okay, nice.
I liked that. I thought that was cool.
Oh, you liked how it set the scene. Okay, carrying on then. Dune Part 2 explores the extent of his power and whether it corrupts him or not. The questions raised around the morality of how he handles it and what decisions he is going to make give you a lot to think and talk about. And I loved that. So this is what I like. I started it with I figured out what's wrong with Dune.
Two goods
and a bad.
Because, it's kind of like a... it was brilliant, but there was something missing. It was like a 10 out of 10, and then there was something detracting from it. That was kind of what I was trying to say with that opening line.
8.2, I know I was surprised because I gave it such a high score, but 8.2 is what would you say? You say 8's a great.
8's a great.
Right?
9's are just like the most
ridiculous. There shouldn't be
films.
many.
Yeah.
And I agree. There really shouldn't be. In my head, like something like 29s in your lifetime is probably
right. Exactly. And also, I was trying to account for the fact that this is an enjoyment rating, and that later on it's going to be given very, very high scores for how good the movie is.
Yeah.
So I was kind of counting for that a little bit.
On top of this, the films are directed by an individual with vision. This seeps into the details where everything is just right. And when you sit in front of a big screen and the costumes, the special effects, the sound design, the makeup artists, and the cinematography all sing together as an orchestra, it is a life-changing experience cinematically. So very, very in line with some of the stuff we spoke about at the end there, where as an experience, and in line with your title as well, watch it on the biggest screen with some big boy speakers.
Unbeatable. It's generation-defining level of quality of cinema.
And it sounds almost like we're being, we're exaggerating here for effect, but really, certainly from my experience, I can say that it was an amazing event for me to go
We've
to.
watched some of the greatest films of the last 100 years for this podcast, and even then, it's not often we talk about a film where we say, like, this is something different cinematically.
I feel like with cinematic ones, on a tangent a bit, it almost has to be modern because I may be wrong here, but the idea behind being at the cutting edge of what people are doing right now is quite important.
The highest budget, the highest like special effects, and
and this shines.
But it has to be done tastefully, and that's what I tried to make clear in this review as well. Is like it's not just a shitload of money. It's a shitload of money given to somebody who cares and is passionate about it.
And like fantasy / sci-fi, packaged as one, has been a real graveyard for attempted good films. Is very tough.
You need passion, you need vision, you need skill, like the skill required to pull this off.
Part of it is because it's like there's such an alien concept that in order to ground those, it has to be perfect. It's very hard to do something that's ridiculous.
One detail is wrong and it will look terrible. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, for sure. So there've been loads of sci-fi films that have failed. Then you almost forget about them. Yeah, I'm trying to.
It's normal. It's okay for a sci-fi film.
There was one that Wachowski's wrote, Jupiter Rising, Divergence, I think is supposed kind of shite. John Carter of Mars. There's loads. They've happened which are rubbish, and they're massive budget. They're massive failures because it's cost so much.
So much money.
But when a sci-fi fantasy film hits and you get to see it at the cinema, it is
generation
something else.
You talk about it amongst Game of Thrones and Harry Potter's and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings.
For
and
sure,
all that.
there's things that people remember. Generation defined is a great way of putting it. So carrying on then, but whilst Denis and Frank were crafting these masterpieces, they forgot about Duke Leto. Duncan Idaho, we forgot his name, didn't we, before? Duncan Idaho, and the human beings in this story which were lost. I never really felt any of Paul or Jessica's pain for those losses, despite the film taking place immediately after the first one ends. And so the whole driving force behind the plot, which is really about what you would... something for revenge? Is that
what you would do for revenge?
What you would do for revenge. Didn't connect with me. Instead of feeling the pain from losing a father, I felt the frustration of a political loss, and so I didn't really care.
That really would have been in italics if somebody else. I didn't really care.
Okay, mine was I didn't really care.
I didn't give a
you know what, Denis?
No. It's like I didn't really.
Got it. That that baseball. All right, you've put a bit of effort in, but I didn't really care because you forgot about Oscar Isaacs and his beautiful beard and Duncan Idaho
and his
weird face.
My boy.
Hello, my boy. So, all right, that point then, that last paragraph is something that you spoke about. We discussed right at the start of this. Yeah. How, because I had some answers for that, or my interpretation of why I didn't mind that as much. How do you feel about that now, having spoken about it?
Honestly, it remains completely unchanged because what I effectively am trying to touch on is the emotional response that I felt to the film at the time.
Yeah,
and I didn't, and regardless of how many reasons you can give the emotional side of a film, it's just down to how your soul reacts to that thing and that story and that loss or that joy or whatever it is. And I still just didn't feel that powerful emotion around the story.
Sometimes you got to just call a spade a spade. We're literally talking about a film where the main purpose is to say, be careful of getting yourself swept up in seeing meaning in things where there aren't any meaning.
Right.
And what I've done, you could argue, is I've gone like, yeah, but there's a reason behind all of these things.
Yeah,
and so these because I'm swept up in it. So is it ironically...
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so...
Hot take from the Late Night Podcast. I like that a lot.
So yeah, I do get what you mean, and I think it's worth remembering that if you had a gut, we talk about our gut reactions here, and mine is higher based on the fact that I was swept up. Yours is lower
emotionally
because you had a nagging thing, which we were kind of trying to
niggling
that you were trying to think about, and then finally you cap it off with, overall this film is a masterpiece, but for me personally, I just wasn't that emotionally invested, and so my enjoyment score. There you go. We said exactly what.
It's an 8.2.
It's an 8.2.
Yeah.
I really liked that, by the way. I enjoyed the review. I enjoyed reading it as well.
Yeah, that was good fun.
I quite liked that we did it after we'd spoken about the film.
We could chat. I agree. I think we could do that again. I enjoyed writing it as well. I would say probably the main point that I've sort of come up with whilst we've been talking that I didn't include in that, and it's similar to watch it with the biggest screen and speakers that you can, is like one of the reasons why it didn't get as high a score is because of the whole thing about what if you watched it on a phone. That was the thing that I said earlier. I was like, if you watch it on a phone and you took away a lot of the grandeur of it, what's left? And that is really where I think it kind of let me down a little bit. Is they just needed to think a little harder about like how powerfully I felt about these characters and about these losses and about these wins and about the romance and it just felt a little bit drained of soul.
Yeah, I think that for me, like you mentioned, the idea of watching it on a phone and like that just is so. I get what you mean. Like the thought of that. It would just be such a waste.
Yeah, it would lose so much.
And I imagine if you said that to Denis, like, being like, could you? He'd probably be like, don't watch it on a phone. I don't want people to watch my films on phones.
Why watching it on a phone, you idiot? But it kind of brings up the point of like, well, if a film has a really powerful story, like a story that tears at your heart and like it makes you want to cry your eyes out or laugh out loud or whatever, it doesn't really matter what medium you watch it on. It should still be able to do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think this film really showed that to me. I kind of realized that when I was watching this in IMAX, and I was like, my head was blown off by it. I couldn't believe how amazing this thing was. And yet I left and I was like, but why am I reluctant to give it this above a 9? Why is it bothering me that I came out and I was like, it's got to be above 9. And I was like, but it just doesn't feel right. Something's not there. Yeah. And writing this review is really kind of really helped me try and understand like what it is that led me to that.
And similarly for me, it's a case of do I prefer the first one because of that same sense of is my enjoyment of this the fact that I just clicked with the world and I just love it for what it is.
So brilliant.
And so maybe that's why I'm struggling to work out if I prefer the first or the second. But yeah, I tell you what, one thing we haven't spoken about that I am very excited for is the third one and seeing the direction it goes in there. Because my understanding is that the third one is, I don't want to go into too much detail and ruin it.
Perhaps I should, because I haven't done much research. So here's my understanding. This is something that actually helped it for me. Was I left the film and I said, I don't really care what happens in the third film, and that annoys me. Why have they not spent time setting it up? And then when I researched it, what I found was Dune 1 and 2 are based on the first book.
Yeah.
And that is why it comes to this conclusion that kind of feels almost complete and satisfying.
Right.
And then the third book is... the third film will be on the next book.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that's why it felt like that. And I'm not going to... Yeah, I won't spoil... Like, I know what the idea is behind the next book, but that is... Yeah, Dune 1 and 2 are based on the first Dune book.
Yeah, and I won't spoil any of it, but more than anything, I like that it's encapsulated in terms of the book feels resolved. It feels like if they had decided not to do a third film, and I know Denis spoken about this, it feels like there's closure as to where we're at. The story has a good completion. And then the second one, kind of the third one based on the second book, I'm more at this point, like, I know that it's going to be different.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see how he approaches it, Denis. That's what's exciting me about it.
It's very exciting.
It's seeing a man that's in his bag and just like, what's he going to do next about it? So
he's an artist.
So I'm excited, really excited.
He's an artist and a master. And
also, I don't think that another thing which I could be worried about, like I'm thinking specifically like the Matrix films, where I know Tarantino's spoken about this, and I get the sense as well, where the second and third kind of ruin the first a bit, or they make it a bit worse.
So I'm told.
I don't think that the third one now could ruin the first and second.
In fact, to make a broader point, I really like the fact the second film took place immediately after the first one.
Yeah, that was cool.
And so, like, the places that, whether it's Denis or somebody else, chooses to start and end each film, I think personally is done really well.
Yeah.
It bothered me when I first left the cinema because I was like, obviously there's going to be a Dune 3. But when I did my research and found out that that's not quite how this works, actually the ending of Dune 1, the start of Dune 2 and the ending of Dune 2 were all selected really well.
Yeah. And I think that if I could make one more piece of advice, one more comment. We've spoken about the film and kind of packaged Dune 1 in there for a lot of this conversation. And for me, I see them almost as one film, like sort of the Kill Bill 1 and 2 together. And I think going forward, I'm so excited when I get to do like a marathon of both.
We should do a Dune 1-2 marathon together.
For sure.
I'd love to watch that with you now, because we've both done such a ridiculous amount of research for this. Like,
it'd be really cool. And
it would be
maybe
very
I should read the bloody books as well. Might be.
I've only watched 1 and 2 once each, so I would be really interested to see them again as well. Actually,
for sure. I reckon we'll organise that after this weekend when we've done basically Dune.
Oh my goodness, I will be sick to death of Dune afterwards. Right, we are going to move on to the second part of the podcast. We're going to probably try and make it a little speedy because we've really enjoyed taking our time over this. We're going to do our critical scores. Basically, what we're striving for here is objectivity. Mm-hmm. So in the first 2 out of 9 scores that we give these films, this is leaning into the subjectivity of it. Mm-hmm. And it does not account for time, because we watch a lot of old films. And so if we watch an old film and we think it's just boring and we don't like it, then those first 2 scores, they don't account for that. We just give it a lower score.
Yeah.
For these next 7 scores that we're going to give, we are basically trying to decide how good the film is.
Yeah.
Regardless of how much we enjoyed it, how well made is this piece of art? And it's going to be objective. It doesn't matter as much for this that we're accounting for time, because obviously it was only released very, very recently. So we're going to do the critical scores next. We're going to start with plot. Plot is a sequence of events which takes place in the narrative. So we're looking at questions like, do they make sense? Are the stakes high enough? Were there any good surprises? We give ourselves 2 minutes. We're going to agree on a rating out of 10. Should we get a timer up? I think.
Yeah, and whilst Jamie's doing that, just to add a bit, so to help with the objectivity of these, and yes, that's a bit of a silly use of objectivity because we're deciding. The gut reaction scores we've given are really how we feel about a film, and now what we do when we break them down into these different 7 sections, we are also comparing against the other films that we watch. So the level of objectivity that we give is based around, okay, I'm able to compare this film to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or The Thing, or Casablanca. So we have this list in the Cine files, so we have that in front of us, and we're going to be comparing. So what does this constitute? Is it a 7? If so, this is the category it would be in with these other films for plot. So if that doesn't come across, that's kind of the idea around.
That's what we're aiming for.
When we mention these other films, there are other ones that we've ranked.
And basically the whole objective here is to get the best final number to tell us how good a movie is. How much did we enjoy it? How well made was it? Accounting for time, just all together, rather than just trying to pluck a number out of the air out of 10. We're splitting it up into 9 different areas between 2 people.
Yeah.
And we take the average. To give everyone an idea, the highest average critical score that we've got so far is The Godfather, I believe. And that has landed a 9.29. So the 9s and the 10s, we've given quite a lot out, and yet still they mean a lot. We just have been watching some absolutely ridiculously good films.
Yeah, we're talking, the ones that we've reviewed so far are classic.
Godfather, Chinatown,
this is the first modern film we're doing, and so it's going to be fun starting to see films that aren't actually that good populated into this.
Yeah, 100%. We're going to add some more off air, but the newest film that we've done is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I think. Yeah, released in 2000.
Yeah, so we're going to start
24-year, quarter of a century almost after. Right, okay, so plot, the sequence of events, and we are a go. Right, okay, so what's your initial thought?
So we've had a long chat about the plot, and there are elements that obviously we don't like plot points that are maybe...
Which ones? Remind me.
The Harkonnens just blowing up the...
Okay, yeah. Why don't people just trade water with the Fremen to win them over instead of this ridiculous Messiah?
Yeah,
thing?
so some of it I think is more a case of the actual narrative of the story is for me based around the Messiah idea. So growing a religious figure,
which comes under plot, which
does come under plot, but I think you can then, it does ignore that the plot isn't perfect, I think, because the themes are thematically it's very strong. Some of the ways they get from point A to point B, like in your example of Paul has loads of plot armor, that ties with the Messiah element of it, but also it does mean that if you were just looking at it objectively, every single time Paul has something come up, he kind of passes it with flying colours without too much issue.
So it's definitely not a 10. The 9s are Citizen Kane, Apocalypse Now, Princess Bride. Is that all of them?
Looks like it. Yeah, you've ordered it.
So the thing for me is, right, those thematic things that you talked about really don't come under any other category, and I'm with you on the fact that they are really cool.
Important.
Like it's such a fun concept to explore. And I know we take the piss out of me for it, but like I do think in many ways you want to split it into, okay, what's pushing it forward and what are the problems with it?
Yeah.
Because you can have something where it's like, oh my God, I'm so invested in this plot moving forward. It's so interesting and it's so powerful. You've just got to kind of accept a few details.
And added to that, whilst we've still got a bit of time, the world building and intricacy of what Herbert created, I think that has to kind of be into plot as well. Maybe a bit of character.
I think it would be unfair to give it lower than a 9.
Oh, maybe an 8.
We always go with the
8.
lower score.
Has to be 8. Because I've just said 8.
Okay, right. So 8 out of 10 for Dune Part 2's plot.
We alluded to something there.
And could you just summarize why we've decided with 8?
Yeah, so thematically very rich, world building good. I mean, excellent. But getting from A to B, there are a few things happened which we spoke about in the main part where it's kind of almost a foregone conclusion. How Paul gets from certain points.
Yeah.
There are also plot points which we don't like as much as well. Also, as well, I didn't really like the relationships sometimes. So
does that come under plot or character or?
I think maybe
dialogue.
Everything. Yeah, maybe. Okay. Well, you know what? It could have been a 9.
It could. Yeah, I think it would have been an 8.5 if we were allowed decimal places.
But we always go. This is another point. If we're in conflict, we go with the lower.
Okay, so that gives us our next category, which is character. Now, character is the collection of beings within the narrative. One of the things I prepared for this was I pulled up a definition for each of these.
All right, fair
so,
enough.
Character is the collection of beings within the narrative. Do we love them? Do we hate them? Do we love that we hate them or hate that we love them? What's the kind of how do we feel about the characters in it? You have 2 minutes, the Main Night Podcast, rating characters in Dune Part 2. Which are the best? I love Paul Atreides.
Paul
is one of the most complex,
I think this is a very high score because this, I mean, for everything that maybe we undermined maybe too much in the plot element, like the characters, you're talking about the actual on the page, the richness of what was created.
No performances, no dialogue, just the decisions that they make. The circumstances which they're in.
The inventiveness of the characters that were created. So all of the stuff around that we spoke around artificial intelligence not being used, and so humans become kind of mega beings and are able to do things. That's under character. That's amazing. That's
very,
so
very
interesting. And particularly in the motives of the characters.
Yeah,
this is something in the book that is very intricately laid out, and each person has their own.
We are rating the movie
for sure, but I do think that they do a good job as well of, without using internal dialogue, they show that everyone has conflicting interests.
Yeah,
and they introduce interesting, vibrant characters in order to show those interests as well.
I agree. Is there any reason why we couldn't give it a 10?
Let's have a look at the 9s and compare then.
10's a Godfather and The Thing. 9s are from, oh my goodness, we got quite a few.
I tell you what,
Chinatown, Psycho, Apocalypse Now, Casablanca, Jaws, and Heat. I just think, you think about the characters in Casablanca and Jaws and Heat, they are. Okay, yeah, no, I think it's a 9. I was going to give it a 10.
I was going to say a 10. Who's the worst? Which characters are bad? Which characters are kind of pointless or redundant or. Is that me making that noise?
No, it's just our creepy floorboards. There really aren't that many, are there? When you're just looking at character.
I think we gave The Thing character 10, and I would say, look, dialogue and performance, I think it's lower, but I think character, let's give it
the complexity of the characters is ridiculously, it's just fantastic. It's so interesting.
I'm going to say...
I'll tell you 10. What I didn't like about the characters. Here you go. I thought of one thing, the Harkonnens.
Okay.
I just felt like they were not complicated enough. They were just the bad guys. They wore black. They were in their black and white land. They slit people's throats. There was no... They were just kind of spoon-fed a little bit.
Yeah, maybe they're a bit more complex in the books, but I will give you, in the film...
They were just a bit okay, these are clearly the bad guys. Is there anything more to them than that? Other than just, chaos?
Well, they do come from a very harsh planet.
All right, you know what, mate? I actually want to give it a 10, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't think I've watched any film on this list where there's so many characters with such rich, complicated arcs and backgrounds, and that for me is enough of a driving force that I will forgive the Harkonnens in the film being a little bit spoon-fed bad guys,
but from a very harsh planet.
Yeah, I mean, God, it was a black sun.
Black sun.
So, I mean, God, that makes you evil by default.
So, dialogue.
Oh, God. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so the 10s.
Oh, do you want to start there?
Yeah. So,
you guys.
The Main Night Podcast, dialogue. Dialogue is the lines spoken between the characters. Makes sense.
Nice.
Was it witty? Did it show you more about the characters? Was it creative? We have 2 minutes to agree on a rating out of 10. Go.
All right, was the dialogue bad?
I think I think it, like, for me, it's around a 7 sort of number.
Yeah, okay.
It was, there was nothing,
point,
there was no way it was like lower than a 6.
It was funny in some points.
And there were some
definitely
very funny moments. That's true. I forgot about those.
And also with fantasy, it's always going to be a bit, sometimes a bit jarring because dialogue in fantasy is so different.
But you can't give them that in this. You can't give them that in this because, like, you're comparing them against the non-fantasy films. So
for sure.
So,
but I don't think what I'm saying is I don't think it's bad.
I would agree. I think it's okay. Yeah, I think it's 8 is great. 8 gave us for dialogue gave us Citizen Kane, Space Odyssey.
It's not as good as that, is it? We had some
we put The Thing and Chinatown in 7s for dialogue. We can't be giving it higher than a 7 then, surely.
No, I agree. I think that what have we got in here? So 7s: Alien, Apocalypse Now, Psycho, Chinatown, The Thing. Exorcist is 6.
I don't remember The Exorcist that well.
I think that was it above? Was it average? 7's around goodish, right?
7's good. 7 is good. 8 is great. And I think it was good. I don't think it was
good.
I definitely don't think it was great.
You don't think it was a 6?
6. What would be the qualitative word for 6? Average.
Yeah. Average.
For me, when I think 6, I think slightly lower than average.
Yeah, maybe 6.5 is average.
Yeah, I think like a 6. I know. Yeah, you kind of got to decide: is it below average or above average? That's some rating system.
Tell you what. Dune 1 below average for my boy, but Dune 2,
but they killed him.
I don't remember 7.
I think 7's okay. I did love this film. I thought it was really great. Yeah, okay, we'll give it a 7. Brilliant.
Performance.
Okay, so this is the area where I was very much looking forward to getting your input on because I knew nothing about. So the Main Night Podcast is rating the performances within Dune Part 2. We are classing performance as the acting from those within the film. I remember looking at the definition for performance and thinking, that's not helpful, because it was like, oh, the acting. So I guess that's just what we're going with. So, Main Night Podcast, what do they think of the performances within Dune Part 2? We have 2 minutes to agree on a rating out of 10. Go.
All right. Good performances. In my opinion, Austin Butler's I think it's the best performance. It's my favourite. Also, the Baron is decent.
Fantastic.
And Stilgar's good, although not the hardest character, still good. Some pretty meh performances or fine. Florence Pugh doesn't really do much in it. I'm pretty happy with Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah,
to be
he
fair.
did a good job. It's not,
Zendaya, although I didn't really like their love story, they were fine.
They were fine. Yeah, they were
performances good. That I'm. Oh, and Lady Jessica is pretty good as well.
Yep.
Performances that I'm very hit or miss on. I think that Christopher Walken, it just doesn't make any sense.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
I'd like it's wild. It's not entirely his fault. He is just Christopher Walken,
yeah,
just walking in about.
Yeah.
I just don't know who thought that was the smart casting idea. Can you imagine? Here's what I was thinking. Right? Can you imagine if the Emperor was Charles Dance?
It's Charles
Lord Tywin.
Oh,
like someone who is threatening, who is powerful, who's not a joke. Christopher Walken is literally like a joke. Like people find him funny.
He looked like he wasn't really sure why he was in the room.
Can you imagine
if
imagine if Charles Dance is asking where the Muad'Dib is? Like if he's the one that
you've upset me there.
Threatening the Baron. Like the Baron has been portrayed as this big bad character.
Yeah.
And we've got Christopher Walken like
that is such a blunder, that, isn't it?
He's just such a bizarre choice. But that's one performance. Other than that, like there aren't really any great performances other than, in my opinion, Austin Butler, and I suppose the Baron's good as well.
I think the Baron stood out to me I'm not as confident on performances, but the Baron stood out to me as being something more so than Austin Butler.
So let's have a look. Can you order some? So
I've got the 8s highlighted because they're massive.
Thing, Chinatown, Psycho, Apocalypse Now. I mean, I'd be very happy saying 6 or 7.
I was going to say 7 because it was if it wasn't for
good.
Christopher Walken.
7's good, right?
7's good, and the performances were good.
It's good. You got a couple of decent ones, and you got one which is bad.
What would you give it if it didn't have Christopher Walken in it?
What are our 8s? We got loads of 8s. I'll probably bang it into 8, to be fair.
Okay, so I personally think that
7.
makes it a 7.
Yeah, all right, 7.
All right, cool. Awesome. It's funny how we haven't once met the time yet.
I know. You know what we need to? We need to add the actual noise that happens when it goes off, because then at least we'll feel accountable to the noise going off.
I could do that, but I don't know.
Can't be asked now, but yeah, maybe next time.
Okay. Next May Night podcast is rating Dune Part 2's visuals. This is an exciting one. This includes CGI, costume, and makeup.
All right.
And cinematography, sorry, which is obviously very important. We have 2 minutes to agree on 10.
The question is,
do the blue eyes
knock it
do
down?
the blue eyes stop it from being a 10 out of 10 visual?
There's no way it's got to be 10, right? Like,
It's got to be.
Not everything's perfect, and this is as close to perfect. It's literally just blue
There's
eyes.
one other 10, and it was Citizen Kane.
What the fuck?
What were we
there's another
thinking?
Star Wars, right? Space Odyssey.
Oh, sorry, I haven't ordered them yet. Yeah, Citizen
Space
Kane
Odyssey.
and Space Odyssey. I think
Star
because we were
Wars?
accounting for time.
To be fair, Star Wars, there was a few. It's the models that weren't as good. This is a 10, mate. Let's not waste any time on this.
I think that it got the visuals. The visuals, the sandworms, the Emperor's ship, the actual land of Arrakis, shooting it in Abu Dhabi, which I'm sure you know. They spent like months and months in an actual desert shooting this, only being able to shoot between certain hours, and it showed in the film. There were so many good points. The costumes were sick.
Yeah.
Like,
it's stunning. Like, it's
a beautiful film to watch. The cinematography, like every shot is like a professional photo.
Yeah,
where there's something happening in it.
Yeah, 10 out of 10. It is, unsurprisingly, it is a 10 out of 10 for visuals for Dune.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
All right,
well,
sound then.
Hang on. Let's reset the timer. So the May Night podcast is now rating Dune Part 2, their sound design. This, how good were the sound effects? What did we think of the score? Were there any other elements of sound which impacted the story? We have 2 minutes to agree on a rating out of 10. Go.
Yeah, and similar with visuals here, like it's kind of the holistic, any overview of any sound elements, as Jamie mentioned. So we've spoken about this in the podcast. It's going to be a high score. It really did a great job of pulling you in with not just the, Hans Zimmer's score elements, but all of the sound design elements as well. Now, what we have had a bit of a predilection towards in the past is films that have good, melodic scores. So, Empire Strikes Back, Godfather, Jaws. I mean, it's not crazy melodic, but it's so iconic.
Yeah.
So this wouldn't come under that. It'd be more like an ambient.
And there's that to think about. And the other thing that we've got to give them account for is the fact that they came up with 4 languages for it, which has got to come under sound.
Right.
There's all these. I'll tell you a great sound moment right at the start with the throat singer. That's so cool.
Another incredible sound bit. Hey, I got to join us. When the baby speaks.
The bloody baby.
You got to join us. I don't need the sound.
Okay, maybe, yeah. I don't know. I think for me personally, if I was rating this would be a 10 without a question.
Yeah.
I think. For me, the sound is a large part about what made me leave this, what made me in my seat leave planet Earth and enter into this world was the sound. It kind of really just made the world a difference.
Fucking do it.
10. This is going to be one of our highest rated films. It's got to be.
I think that's why it's,
Especially when we move on to genre realization. Now, I tried to Google a definition for genre realization. Neither of us have ever really understood this one, but it's something like, how does it compare against the rest of its genre?
Yeah, how iconic is it? Well, firstly, we need to work out what genre it is.
Well, you said earlier, what was it? Sci-fi fantasy. So
Yeah.
like all your kind of
Elements of both, I'd say. Science fiction probably more so, but I think it's got
if it were
fantasy
me
tropes
holding
as
it
well.
against fantasy or science fiction, I would hold it against fantasy.
Mhm. But either, I think that for me, we're going to look. We've rated a lot of classics. We've given a lot of genre realization scores, and what we typically do is we give it a 10.
And I think that this is deserving of that.
This is actually in some of the scores that we've done before for genre realization, we've pigeonholed ourselves with not understanding what it means, and we've gone, okay, is The Exorcist scary? So should it be a 10? We know it's a horror, but what makes a well realized horror? Is it scary? Is it comedy?
Disturbing?
Should it be laughing, or should it just be this is a famous horror?
Is it influential?
Whatever metric we use for.
It changes.
Dune.
It's dynamic.
But whichever one we use for Dune, I am happy to actually give it a 10.
I agree
Usually we just
completely.
give things a 10 because we feel bad at the genre realization category. In this case, I think that it's deserving.
I'm kind of
a 10.
liking sitting around the how does it compare against the rest of its genre.
Yeah.
That's quite nice.
And to be fair, when we start to do more modern films and we stop going, when we move away from the classics of
Like
their genre,
Jaws.
shark horror,
horrors.
classic shark horrors like Jaws, then.
Much
we're
better
gonna
than
get
Jaws
less
Part
10.
2, 3 and
For
4.
the time being, we've done 17. This is the 17th film, and it looks like about the 14th.
Should we have a look? How many
10s?
How many 10 out of 10 genre?
A lot of 10s.
That's got to be what? It's got to be nearly 10.
So
of
funny.
them.
It's so
3,
funny that we
13,
did
yeah,
this.
it's 10. Should we add our 11th 10?
Yep, 10.
10 out of 10 for genre realization,
Genre
which brings us
realization.
to our final score for Dune Part 2. So the May Night Podcast has split up the rating of Dune Part 2 into 9 different categories. We have had how much did Fred enjoy the film and how much did Jamie enjoy the film out of 10 to 1 decimal place. Then we have rated it out of 10, not to 1 decimal place, just as a whole figure, in plot, character, dialogue, performance, visual, sound, and genre realization, and taking the average. So, Fred thought it was a 9.2 out of 10 for enjoyment. Jamie thought it was an 8.2 out of 10 for enjoyment. They then gave it 8 for plot, 10 for character, 7 for dialogue, 7 for performance, 10 for visuals, 10 for sound, and 10 for genre realization, which puts us at 8.82 out of 10 for Dune Part 2, neatly behind Jaws at 9.08 and The Godfather at 9.29, and ahead of Apocalypse Now at 8.56 and Psycho at 8.53. That's a bloody good film, is what it is.
Yeah, that is very
to be
very well
released
rated.
to be released now and then put between Godfather, Jaws, Apocalypse Now, and Psycho.
Yeah.
For the Mate Night podcast.
For us. For us
to
only.
rate it that highly.
On the Cinephiles. Yeah, to be honest, I'm
Very happy
It was
with
amazing. I really enjoyed it more than those other films. And I think it has enough in terms of the cinematic footprint for us to justify that it deserves a very high score.
Faye and I were talking about this yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Will this film be remembered? Will people be talking about it? For a long time they will. Yeah. Without a doubt. People will remember this series of Dune, this adaptation of Dune. This will be an influential movie. Yeah.
Nice. 8.82. Great score.
I'm loving these like to 2 decimal places out of 10.
It's nice having a
Very
bit,
cool,
bit
isn't it?
extra as well, isn't it? So
And a final score. Okay, well, I'll tell you what then. We'll wrap it up there. Dave, you're a hero for getting this far through the episode.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you what as well. Rachel, hello.
Yeah,
Thank you for
do you want to
listening.
know what she gave it?
Oh, yeah, go on.
10.
What?
Yes.
10 out of 10 for enjoyment?
Yeah.
Wow, that's sick.
I was like, yeah, do you not going to leave any room
For
She was
anything
like-
better?
She was like, well, if it's a fantasy, I usually give it a 10.
Do you know what?
She did
I like
love
it.
it.
I respect
She
it.
loved
Like,
it.
I think I will. I was thinking about this the other day. I don't think either of us will ever give a 10 because
No.
I don't think we'll ever feel
It's not
comfortable
the way I
doing
feel
it.
about a film.
But
though.
I
Yeah.
kind of get the whole philosophy of like, yeah, I just give 10s out occasionally. Like
Yeah,
some films are 10 out of 10 for me.
Her 10, I spoke to her about this. Her barrier for 10 is like, if you get up to a certain point, you're a 10. So
Okay, I
basically,
like it. I like
rather
it.
than
It's
it
cool.
needing to be a perfect, there is no more enjoyment I can possibly
It's a
have.
threshold.
It's a threshold for 10. That's how she looks at it.
And it's a fucking good film to put as your...
Great film.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it's got a very high score. Not too surprised. And it's been really fun chatting about it.
And if you're listening still, Faye, thanks for listening. Number
Thanks,
one fan,
Faz.
though, Dave. Appreciate it, man.
Cheers, Dad. Appreciate it, especially because you haven't seen the film. So that's
Not yet.
yeah, give it a watch.
All right. GG's, guys. See you later.
See you later.